All rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the Planning Board meeting of December 8th, 2022. First on the agenda, the Planning Board is going to discuss the Town Board referral of the Comprehensive Master Plan and the zoning code draft. Pat, would you mind facilitating tonight's session?
Of course, Mr. Chairman. So, at our last session, we left off at the section where we started, where 156.26 Shoreline activities, piers, and docks. So, as you all know, this topic generated an awful lot of comment from the public. That's why we wanted to start on that tonight, so we could devote some time to this particular issue.
Pat, can I ask you what page you're on?
This is page 65 of the draft that you have.
Oh, I have it right here. Thank you. Yep, got it.
26. So, once again, this is the section of the code that talks about special uses. So the prior one we talked about were the battery storage facilities and so forth. So now we're talking about these shoreline activities and docks. Now, we've had, as Michael can tell you better than anybody, a lot of experience with these facilities over the years. And the primary, just to give some context with respect to this, there are overlapping jurisdictional regulations that we've always dealt with respect to the DEC and the DEP and our own special permit requirements. So, Mike has raised this concern that the current draft doesn't seem to acknowledge that particular circumstance particularly well. So part of the conversation that we've been hearing from the public needs to be influenced by the fact that certain of these activities are not under our control. They're regulated activities by other agencies. So that's just something, put a pin in that issue. But because this is so controversial, it's hard to deal with it with multiple agency jurisdictions. So it further complicates the whole conversation about these facilities. So just that was my preamble to talking about this. So the first thing is there's a, which I like to see in these ordinances, which is sort of a purpose of the regulation. Why does the regulation exist? And again, these are sort of generic provisions, but mom and apple pie. Protect the aesthetic beauty of the water bodies and so forth, maintain health conditions, and control building sites and the placement of structures to preserve the shore area, essentially, and minimize hazards. So, all good. Those are laudable goals. So I don't know if anyone has any criticism with respect to the goals that have been established.
I think it covers it all when it says healthful, it says aesthetics, safety.
Yeah, again, they're very generic, and
Yep.
it's mom, apple pie, and Christmas trees, so what could be wrong with that? B is where we start to get into the nitty-gritty, which is the areas to be regulated. So it's within the town of Carmel's jurisdiction to regulate waters and lands, including underwater lands owned by the town of Carmel, and lands and waters on private land, including private underwater lands that are within the town of Carmel. So nothing in here is intended to regulate structures that are affixed directly to or installed on or over underwater lands owned by the state of New York. And that's the multiple jurisdictions I was talking about earlier.
Pat, on that score, this particular paragraph and that particular sentence generated a decent amount of confusion in the public comments.
Yep.
There were people who are under the impression, for example, that second sentence that says nothing is intended, et cetera, that sentence excludes any regulation around Lake Mahopac, which was the center of most comments. I think that what needs to be done is this paragraph needs to be revised to make it very clear what it is, and this kind of goes with Mike's comment, make it very clear what it is that is being regulated and the authority for it, and is crystal clear on what is not being regulated. Because it's clear that all of this body of regulation, this whole section 156-26 is intended to cover Lake Mahopac. So,
Well, other lakes also.
as well, but
Right.
the
So-
comments were,
Right, so the first comment I would say with respect to this is they're talking about this bifurcated jurisdiction issue. However, the facility we're talking about isn't bifurcated. It starts on the land and goes out into the lake. There are land board improvements or inboard improvements, and there are lake associated improvements. So, right, all out of the box, I'm a bit confused by this because you have a facility that's in the lake, but what got you to the lake? Is that regulated by this? How do we regulate that separately or independently? Or should we regulate that separately? Aren't they connected? You're not getting, the dock provides some access to your waterfront property where you do something. So your boat gets to the dock in some way, or your kayak, or your boathouse. Some of the improvements we've seen before the planning board are often associated with the dock that's further extended into the lake. So once again, it becomes difficult for us to render a judgment regarding those inboard improvements, yet the DEC has a say over the lake-related improvements. Do we bring them to the meetings? Do they co-op or collaborate with us? They never have.
well, for example, I've heard or read recently in the context of all of this that part of the rationale for the authority to come out with these regulations and more, I guess, is the Greenway Pact. And if that's what we're intending to rely on, I think we should state that. It's just not clear what's happening and why.
Yeah, and again, so the very next section, or two sections down, it lists all the other agencies that theoretically are involved in these things, which it's 6 other agencies. So again, the levels of, the layers of interagency jurisdiction, it points out how it's complicated, but again, it doesn't solve the problem of how you coordinate when you do things.
But my point is, there are residents of our town who read this and came away concluding this does not cover the lands and structures on Lake Mahopac. And that needs to be cleared up.
Right, and I think what this is implying is it probably doesn't because it falls under the jurisdiction of one of these other 6 agencies.
No, that's my point. I think it's very clear that the town intends for these regulations to apply to structures on Lake Mahopac, but is not being clear as to that intent and to that application and to the basis for that.
There are numerous decisions from the Supreme Court, I believe they are? The Appellate Division, sorry, that have opined on certain things here, which maybe Bonnie needs to get her hands on so she can include that in here as well, because there's that whole upland structures versus non-upland, there's certain things that give jurisdiction to different groups, agencies, whatever you want to call them. So maybe Bonnie needs to get some of these additional appeals in her
Well, for example,
hands.
that Greenway Pact thing, if that,
The Greenway Pact is merely embodying legislation that permits a participating jurisdiction to enact laws that cover zoning in navigable waters. That's all that is.
but there, when I looked at the Greenway Pact Act, or whatever, there was a paragraph in there that talked about regulating navigable waters. I remember vaguely something about 1,000 feet into.
Yeah, 1,500.
1,500, something like that. And I know there are some people who believe that that is the authority that allows us to do some of this stuff. If that is the case, let's be clear about it. If it's not the case, then what is the town hoping to accomplish with a regulation that doesn't have authority? There has to be authority for this, and let's see what it is.
Crystal clear authority would be helpful.
Yes.
Right, exactly right. So I
Yeah.
think this punts on that issue
Yeah.
that gets drafted today. It says it could be any one of these people, but it's important for us to pay attention to this. That kind of doesn't get us there. So I think that the preamble's fine. The authority section needs to be corrected so we understand who has the authority. I think Mike and Joe are right. There is case law that defines a lot of this stuff. So it's not crystal clear. That makes adopting an ordinance tricky because it's not based on an underlying state enabling legislation. It's based on how the courts have addressed stuff in the past. So courts change, decisions change, and they evolve over time. So that worries me as well. But maybe there are clear parameters that do exist with respect to some of those agencies. The other issue is we deal with other agencies all the time. So we approve site plans where DEP gets involved in approving a SWIP, for example, the Stormwater Management Plan. You don't abrogate your authority to approve that site plan. You have a partner in reviewing that site plan. It's the DEP. We do it with state wetlands. They're part of it. But you don't sort of say, do whatever you want to do. We're not going to say anything about this. Come back to us when you render a decision. You're making the principal decision with respect to those projects, and you fit those other agencies' review elements into your deliberations. So again, here, this is not what this is saying. This is saying, if these other entities have jurisdiction, go at it and do whatever you need to do. Tell us when you're done. We want to, I think in every instance, we want to control the process of the establishment of waterfront improvements, just like any site plan anywhere. If it requires another agency's approval, that becomes part of the process. But I don't think we should relinquish our role in being the primary entity to evaluate the suitability of an improvement on the waterfront.
So I have a question, probably more appropriately directed to Joe, but do we really need to have that sentence in there? Nothing herein as to regulate structures that, I mean, it's almost like,
I think what the intent of it is to call out the fact that there are these other jurisdictions that do have concurrent jurisdiction with the town, specifically the Office of General Services. So I think it's just their way of calling it out that, hey, you're not alone here.
So one of the things that we should try to achieve in the adoption of a zoning code is consistency through the document. So we don't call out all the other agencies that are involved in a
Right.
whatever permit or other approvals, but we do it here. Either do it everywhere or don't put it here either. So again, it's just it's an inconsistency in the drafting of the code, and I get it because people raise these issues and these concerns. And so I think Bonnie was trying to be transparent and make sure you deal with all these things, but we deal with all these things for every application throughout everything you deal with. So I don't know why we deal with it differently here.
right, and if it's a source of confusion, which it seems to be, then, maybe that goes back to my, the question of why do we put it in there? I mean, we can't regulate something that we don't have control over,
Exactly.
so.
So I agree. So this section, again, remember, our task is to not solve this problem, it's to point out to the consultants, we got an issue with this.
Yeah.
So send it back to them, they draft a better provision for us, we're happy. The second piece to this is what a lot of people spend a lot of time commenting on, and that's the specific standards for waterfront activities, piers, and docks.
Pat, before you get to the
I
standards.
never get to the next thing with you.
you
You
know.
always
I'm sorry, you asked,
teasing,
you
I'm
guys
teasing.
asked me to read this, I read
Keep them
it.
under control.
E and F, I just want to call out that, the way this reads, if it's under a certain square footage, you just need a building permit. If it's over a certain square footage, you've got to do a site plan. Okay, so far. What I'm concerned with is, and maybe I don't need to be concerned with this, but if it uses general terms such as activities, which is very long encompassing. What if I've got an existing waterfront structure or an existing something, and I'm repairing it? I mean, that's
Which we
certainly.
often see, that's common for us.
That's certainly an activity. There is provisions later in the code dealing with what happens when you're grandfathered in, but those provisions are fairly onerous in the sense that one requirement I saw said if 50% of the structure has been destroyed, that's it. You are no longer grandfathered. So if you have a dock on a lake, it's actually not uncommon for it to be wiped out by ice flows during the
Absolutely
winter.
right.
So do we need a special carve-out here for activities to repair or replace an existing waterfront structure?
So I think we deal with all waterfront activities a little bit differently than we deal with upland and inland activities, just for the point you raised, Bob.
Yeah.
So things happen to docks, because the lake does stuff as opposed to a hill on the side of the road. So we do need to deal with the waterfront differently. I think the intention of this whole section is to deal with the waterfront differently. So I would agree. We have to insert language that deals with pre-existing conditions a little bit differently on the waterfront because of the likelihood that they'll be disrupted more frequently.
Well, one of the things that came out at one of the recent meetings was someone was stating, I'm sure we're gonna get that their dock right now is 66 feet out. And so as their neighbors, they're all in the 60s somewhere out into the water. And the person, I believe, was on 6N. And he asked the board, which was directed to Bonnie, so how would you treat that? And Bonnie responded saying that that's grandfathered in. So then he said, well, what happens when an ice melt takes it out? Or what happens when it needs to be replaced? Well, then you need to go in front of the planning board. And I'm in the audience thinking about that, saying, I don't think this board wants every dock, because every dock's gonna have to be rebuilt someday, to come back in front of the planning board. Now, he said if you stand at the 25-foot mark, there's no water. You go out to 50, you might have a foot. It's out 66 feet, so I can get the boat out of into the lake.
Yeah.
He goes, and that's why my neighbors are there also. So when you mentioned grandfather, that's what gave me that thought, because there was a big topic in here that one night, because docks are built at distance typically, not to lay on the dock as much as to get your boat out into the
So
water.
this is another instance, Mr. Chairman, where I don't know that the data was developed to support the recommendations that are proposed in the ordinance. So your point's well taken. So how far is that distance from the shoreline to where you get the depth to support a boat?
And it
Is
varies
and-
totally all around the lake.
And we have a number, there's a number that's been developed.
Yeah.
Where did that number come from? So is it an arbitrary number that just came from some code somewhere else?
think so.
Or is it unique to our circumstance? My answer is it should be unique to our circumstance. We should know what that distance is in every instance and build the regulations around the existing condition that exists in our lakes.
But further to Craig's point, if I've got to repair or replace a dock, and now all of a sudden I'm caught by provisions that say I have to either get a building permit or
Yeah.
a planning site plan, there's a cost to doing that. I mean, not everybody is wealthy, and people have to hire lawyers, they have to hire engineers, they have to come before a board, and there is no assurance that the board is going to approve it, or what type of
Well,
basis.
Quite frankly, we would add no value, because what are we gonna, we're gonna say no to someone that's replacing their dock after they've just
Yeah.
spent, $80,000 on a boat, and we're gonna say, sorry, you gotta have it at 25 feet or 50 feet. Well, that doesn't get me out into the lake.
Yeah, so I'm getting back, that's exactly right. So I'm getting back to the point, well, where did that number come from? So let's look at that number.
There's no
That
fixed
number-
But it's not just the number, there are
There's
a
no fixed
number of
number, it's
other
just the number.
qualitative standards in here.
I think it's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Which would then lend it to come to the board. So then we could ask the question, sir, why are you going 60 feet out into the lake?
It's a good point, Anthony. So I would agree. It's one of two things. It's a number based on the existing conditions of our lakes. So it's 20 feet, 30 feet, 60 feet, whatever it is. If they didn't do that analysis, then we don't have a number, but you come to us in every instance and we figure it out on a case-by-case basis.
But then there's a cost to
I was
figuring
gonna
that
say
out.
But we have to be cognizant of, we're expensive at times to do business with. We want to do things faster for the most part. I think we want to streamline things. So I would not want the applicant to spend $1,500 or $2,000 just to come back and say, I have to replace my dock.
And we don't say
They should be able to
anything-
come up without hiring a consultant without getting different permits.
Well, we're gonna require them. An applicant looks at his dock and says, you know what, this is not working anymore, it's dangerous, it's no good, it has to be replaced. That's on him, and that's on the resident's responsibility now to go out and come to us with a plan for the dock. I mean, no different than some of the other docks that have come before us.
Yeah, but these are pre-existing grandfathered docks. So
But they're
why
coming
should he-
to us now because that
But
dock is no
why
longer
should he?
functional or
What I'm
safe.
saying is, why should he, if he's going to have to rebuild it in the same footprint that it was before, why should he have to come in front of us? I'm just not
So I guess
understanding.
Bob, the response to that, again, just playing devil's advocate, is your pre-existing dock you built illegally, and you didn't meet any rule or regulation. And now we're gonna say, but you can rebuild it because it was there previously. My point is, we should have some understanding of what's an appropriate dock to begin with. So the guy may have built a wacky, nutty, crazy dock that shouldn't be replaced because it exceeds all of the reasonable standards that we might apply otherwise. So what you're saying is, no, he gets to rebuild it and make it easy for
Well,
him. My point is, I don't know that that original dock should have been there in the first place, built illegally.
But do you know that it's illegal, just because it was there before?
No, that's the point.
But
So
that's the point. You know,
we've
if it
had the
was there,
25-foot
if I've got a pre-existing house on a non-conforming lot, or whatever it is, you know, and I've got to replace something on that, and, or, you know, tree hits it, and I've got to do it, does he have to come back and get a site plan approval?
Usually not.
Right, so why here?
Because there's a 25-foot max on the length of a dock that's been there at least since 80, maybe 76. And if anything's over the 25-foot length, it was either A, built with the variance, and therefore the variance is still good, or B, built without any approvals, and everybody always thought it was pre-existing. So either way, if they're gonna build it, and if they need to be 60 feet, and they go to the zoning board and say, look, the depth of the water is 3 feet at 50 feet, it's 5 feet at 60 feet, can we get this variance? They're gonna probably listen to them pretty closely and either give it or...
Case-by-case
That's
basis.
option 3, which is put in a standard, maybe right, maybe wrong, who cares, but it's a standard. And if they don't comply, now the zoning board is doing the job of evaluating on a case-by-case basis. So in a sense, you're kind of punting, let the zoning board worry about that hard question, not us.
If there's a way to do this so that,
There's probably 2 categories, Bob, if
Yeah.
you think about it, which is a pre-existing condition that looks fine. Doesn't look like it's a crazy, insane condition. But if somebody has a 130-foot dock or something that's
dangerous.
90 feet wide.
It's dangerous at
with,
nighttime.
right, 20 boats on it, should he be automatically, should you get an automatic pass to
so it sounds like, wrong phrase, but a double standard. One standard for,
Yeah,
for,
right.
for what we would call normal docks, and one for oversized docks.
Right.
Cut the baby, but if you're a normal dock, you shouldn't have to come before
I agree.
any of the boards.
Since we're talking about this, Anthony, I would just mention it. We need a mechanism for when the docks come forward to us, the ones that have snuck in 4, 6, 8 slips, fingers into those docks. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's, I'm trying to think of the issues that have come forward to these meetings. There are people, especially when the taxes had gone up, people are trying to recover some income. So a dock that might have 1 or 2 boats might have 4, 5, or 6 boats now. So that's got to be part of our review process,
Yeah,
too.
again, and that's sort of my point about the standard. So if it's an illegal dock that has 6 finger slips on it, far exceeds what our code envisioned for these things. So do we say, hey, you can rebuild it when the ice damaged it? Yeah, go ahead and rebuild that. Or should there be some provision for us to take a look at that again and address standards? So this is the second piece, Bob, which is what standards would we impose? Do we want to establish a condition where you'd never have finger docks, or you'd never have certain criteria? That's something we should talk about. And Bonnie's given us some things to talk about and think about. But we should understand the context of what we want to regulate. What's a good dock, what's a bad dock? I don't know that we know that at the moment.
But the issue that Craig brought up about, you know, multiple fingers, isn't that covered later on when we get to the
Number of watercrafts.
H, when it talks about residential property and the number of, says, H2, no waterfront structure accessory to residential use shall
Yeah,
be
should be
used.
used or
rented.
rented, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna, that same issue would then run afoul with that.
Right,
part
so
of the code.
the use issue's easy. Like if you're running a commercial marina off your residential dock, that's an illegal operation. I'm still back at, how big is a dock?
Right,
So,
no, I
so,
get it,
so
yeah.
if you establish a dock size, that if you are within that size, you don't have to come back. I'm making it up, whether it's 25 feet, 50
It's,
feet,
we-
whatever,
currently it's 25 feet.
whatever it is. If you've got fingers, the fingers count to the footage, right?
Don't know.
Isn't,
No, it's
wouldn't
from-
that be the right way?
From the high water mark, which is the shore at the high water mark,
To
to
the
the
end of it.
furthest point.
Well, I'm just saying.
We don't do linear feet. We do a straight run. with
So
no matter-
25
So
feet,
so if, as long as
70
it's,
feet wide?
so as long as it's not being rented out, are we care about fingers?
That's always a fun one to prove in court.
No, it's what half the people have been talking about, right? And what the intent of a lot of this was to lessen the traffic on the lake.
Pat, or maybe Mike, is there any state or marine standard for dock building? Because we're talking about lengths and lengths, but more importantly is the structure, if it gets rebuilt. Say, you know, and that way, I think, is what we really have to address.
So that's why I was sort of trying to get to that next point. So there isn't, like, it's not a building code issue where you must have pilings or footings of a certain type for a particular dock. Clearly with docks, it's a case-by-case basis. It's based on the characteristics of the waterfront and so forth. So there isn't a standard that we would simply impose and say, this is what you gotta build. It clearly is a case-by-case kind of a condition. And that's why some of these things should come to you when there are substantial construction-related improvements associated with building somebody's dock. If they have to dredge and excavate to put in the foundation before the pilings, coffer dams, that's big stuff. But that's when, again, now DEC gets triggered when you start dealing with those things in the waterfront portion of the property.
But a lot of these docks are just floating docks.
Just floating docks, that's exactly what, and again, just to complicate the conversation, a lot of them were built on a Sunday afternoon. Nobody talked to Mike about them, so, and there might be electric, there might be water that's out on the docks, so it gets a little funky, there's no question about it. This is a complicated issue. I will say that the conversation about nonconformity, that Bonnie has a provision for the nonconforming provision. It basically says you gotta build it back in accordance with the code. The 25-foot provision, only 2 boats. So-
But on the later, just reiterating my point, later in the code, it says if more than 50% of it is being replaced or was destroyed, you are no longer grandfathered. So we need a special provision about waterfront structures that essentially supersede that.
By structure, you mean buildings with roofs?
Right now, there's a generalized provision, we'll get to it later when we do the rest of the code, that talks about pre-existing
Right.
structures. And what happens when they are destroyed or when they have to be replaced.
So you're talking about docks?
No, what I'm saying is that thing is all-encompassing to the entire code.
It's kind of all-encompassing, but not clear. So it's, Mike, it's docks, piers, slips, and similar waterfront structures. That's how it's defined currently in the code. It
No.
doesn't say bunkhouses, it doesn't.
No, you were talking about this
pre-existing.
grandfathering. I'm talking about the provision later on in the code, which doesn't mention waterfront structures at all.
Now I see what you're saying.
Oh,
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
I'm
didn't, it's
talking
hard to
about
hear. in it.
That's the concern I have.
Yep.
So we need to be more
Yeah, I think-
refined within this
Agreed.
section.
So, as you
Yeah,
said before, Bob, I think
Yeah.
we treat the nonconformity of waterfront structures differently
Yes.
than a house somewhere else.
Or 7-Eleven.
Or 7-Eleven, that's exactly right. So do you want to go through the standards, just to sort of get our heads around that?
Sure.
So the general standards, G, there's 14 standards that have been laid out. So let's just walk through them. So number 1, construction carried out in such a manner so as to minimize the erosion caused by such activity. Construction and excavation activity shall be carried out in the shortest period of time possible. So, Mike is smirking on that one. these are generalized standards. I don't know how it was intended to impose these standards necessarily in the review process. Are you familiar, Mike?
No, in my opinion, that's an ECB comment, because generally they ask them, when are you starting, when are you finishing? You have to have your silt fence up from this point to this point, you have to have stabilization at this, it's a part that tells them, that's the board that tells them how physically to do the steps adjacent to the lake. We're the one that says it's okay to build it, but not the specifications on it. Agreed?
Yeah, I do agree, and what this is saying is you shall. So these are, because the word is shall is in there, now it's Mike. So if you don't minimize erosion, do you need a variance? It said you shall minimize erosion, and you're not minimizing erosion, do you need a variance for that? All of these standards are those sort of generalized construction standards. Mike's right, typically the kind of standards the ECB imposes when they review these things, not a zoning provision that requires compliance or non-compliance. So again, I'm not clear what the intent was of inserting these provisions where they are proposed and using the language that you shall apply, that shall apply, excuse me.
Yeah, it almost seems like that whole G section could go into the ECB wetland section as their guidelines for people doing work on the lake.
Well, not when you turn the page and get to number 7. and some of the other
Or
stuff.
the alternative is it establishes general guidelines that you should think about, but not imposed as a zoning requirement. That if you didn't meet it, you need a variance. So I think that would be an easy clarification to take that language out. And it's just, these are the things you ought to look at when you construct a waterfront facility and try to do them, as opposed to you must or shall.
So I had a comment on number 7.
Okay, let's go through them one at a
Okay.
time. So shoreline areas, excepting beaches, shall never be exposed, unvegetated for longer than a period of time, designated by the building inspector. So again, a lot of wiggle room there and a lot of unclear provisions, and especially when there are timing issues related to this. So somebody makes an application, we have the issue when we clear wooded areas where there are certain species that we can't clear during certain periods of time during the year. Theoretically, that's exactly right, bats.
Yep.
So theoretically, the same would apply in terms of the disturbance of a shoreline. I'm unfamiliar if that's the case or not, but I assume it would be. There are times of the year that are probably not a good time to affect the shoreline of the lake. So someone makes an application, the window is tight, Mike's on vacation, now how do I deal with that? It's in the code. If I can't get the determination from the building inspector and it's in the code, do I need a variance from that? Again, I'm not sure how this applies necessarily, so it's a little bit of confusion.
But from Mike's point of view, wouldn't you rather have some clarity on that?
I don't like when it's my opinion. I like.
That's why I
I
asked.
like numbers.
Yeah, that's time period designated by the building inspector. So, you might say 6 weeks to someone else, and then, 3 months later, someone comes in, 5 weeks. I think,
Correct. And everybody builds at a different rate of speed.
Yeah.
You can't tell them.
so I think clarity for a lot is better for Mike and us.
Isn't that something that the environmental board would deal with?
That was my point.
Yeah.
1 through 4 should really be in the ECB wetland section of the code, in my opinion.
So maybe instead of saying the building inspector, maybe it should say as determined by the environmental board.
So I would back up a little bit, Ray, so that this doesn't refer to the ECB's role in the issuance of the dock permit or the waterfront facility permit.
yeah, good point.
So that should be clarified early up as well, just like the other agencies. The ECB's involved in this, always has been, always has
Always.
been. And they're an appropriate body, by the way, to review these things. This is their bailiwick.
When do we get ECB review of this document?
They don't.
They don't?
I don't
Okay.
believe it was referred, by law, it's only required to come to you.
Okay.
But you can certainly seek their
Yeah.
advice if you,
Sure.
for a particular issue like this. 3 is the carryover of the provision that we have today, which is the 25-foot mean high water line mark. And again, that's the conversation we had a little while ago. Is 25 feet the right number? Should it be adjusted based on the conditions of our existing lakes? Is 20 25 fine and everything goes to the zoning board, do we need to adjust that number?
Shouldn't that say all on-land structures? Because if you put a boathouse, are you supposed to
On the other
put
way, keep it-
vegetation from the, so the lake,
Well, it
on
says
the lake
except
into it?
waterfront structures.
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, not all that clear.
G3.
Next one's filling. Again, no placing fill, that's an obvious sort of situation. And clearly ECB. Next one is parking loading service area should be constructed on permeable materials. You often impose that as a condition of your site plan review and approval. Again, it's there, it's a if it's a generalized standard, great, you can take that as a goal. But if it's not, if it's impervious surface, the way it's written out, you need variance.
So, if you look at our lake, and we've had several applicants on 6N come forward. So, I don't know too many of them that are permeable surfaces now. So if they were to come forward, like a couple that we've just seen recently, would we have to make them then go redo their parking area to permeable?
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, right? That's the whole conversation we're having tonight. So many of them are, a lot of them are gravel, you know, but there are some paved parking areas that are on the waterfront.
I saw one big one go up, paving job right up to the lake over the past few weeks.
And we should use the word pervious, because that's what we use everywhere else in the code.
So if
Yeah.
there's restaurants on the lake, if they're coming forward for something, they really need to go back and make this, I mean, that's a big ask.
So restaurant's different. So that's a commercial use, yes. That's a site plan application that should come before you, no question. I'm stuck on the dock at a single-family home. No, that's the area that is troubling to me.
Yeah.
And the amount of,
All the dock space on 6N, they could be coming forward for a small application, we tell them, look, you need to, so that is a little troublesome.
No, but if you already have a house on 6N and you want to put a dock in, you have to pull your driveway out and put in a
Yeah.
permeable driveway according to this
Yes,
code.
if you're, yes, I agree with that.
Exactly.
so the next one deals with lighting. I would add that we should probably bolster that because waterfront lighting is different than that lighting. It's, when you're on the lake, it exhibits its influence differently when it sheds across the lake. And many times, one light bulb on the other side of the lake is disturbing your quality of life on the other side of the lake because somebody had a 100-watt light bulb on the other side.
And I
of the
get
lake.
that call a lot, believe it or not.
I've gotten that call myself,
I get it
saying,
a
look,
lot.
can't you do anything about so-and-so's lights across the lake? And
Yep.
actually, one in particular is the restaurant. I've gotten phone calls on the restaurant where
Good
the
call.
It
lighting
reflects
is
on the water, so
extremely
the-
bright.
yeah.
It's out, it's not downward, it's,
So it should say all lighting at these dock fronts should be downlit and not go past the property line with their direct.
We could even be, you know,
More
add
strict.
foot candle requirements. I'm suggesting this should be much more robust than it is today.
it's a big,
You can get very strict with that. We can start requiring certain X amount of lumens,
Right.
what color scale, you know, what K
Color's
scale.
another important issue, absolutely right.
Especially with the LEDs now that are
Yeah.
so white.
Yeah.
I think we're right here. I think this needs a lot more clarity because it's something we get phone calls on.
Yeah, no doubt.
A lot of lighting comes right across or into the boats, I guess.
So the next one is one that you've dealt with on a couple of occasions. So for residential uses, the minimum shoreline lot width
Can we
required.
stop there for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
For residential uses, what does that mean? Does that mean? Well,
So your CO calls out what kind of use you are?
there are, I guess what's confusing is elsewhere in this area, there is reference to structures where there is just the land and
Yeah,
boathouse.
That's where this will get confusing. You've seen applications where it's just a little narrow lot with nothing there.
6N.
Yeah, so
Is that a residential use?
that's what I'm saying.
Zoned residential, but there's no use.
So should we be referring to the zoning
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I agree with you. I think
Yeah.
residential use is a little bit confusing. because that vacant lot, it doesn't support a residential use.
Exactly.
It's in a residential zone, but there's no use on it.
That's been a topic also at these meetings is, look, I have a piece of property on 6N, the total width of my property is 20 to 30 feet, whatever it is. A lot of these requirements don't work for that.
Absolutely.
So if they have to replace their dock,
Well,
they're going to have to go in for a zoning variance.
some you couldn't have a dock on because you need 15 feet on each
Right.
side.
The problem with that, Craig, is if you
And
allow,
they don't even have 75 feet.
Right.
sorry, I didn't mean to do that. If you allow a dock on a 20, or an 18-foot wide property, how are you going to have off-street parking?
Yeah.
That's
So that's
just the,
a-
that's
that's
the
a
applicant
big
we had
hurdle.
not too long ago.
The
Yep.
one we were at that one
Yeah,
day.
absolutely.
It's a huge issue, and
Absolutely.
that's part of the reason for it, because you can't just have a car that touches both property lines. You know what I mean? You need to have a way to get in and out and
Safely, yeah.
safely,
Right.
correct, and that's what issue we had on that one on the other
Yeah,
side, so.
and I think we did the right thing there, because from a safety perspective,
We did, and remember he kept trying to say, but I can see pulling out, and I said,
line of sight.
what is the requirement by code for the highway department? And they told us, and we got it figured out, so.
Yeah.
So this links us back to the non-conforming use issue. So this is saying you gotta have 75 feet. We know that many, many of these lots are not 75 feet, often they're 20 feet wide. So unless the non-conforming provisions are clarified, we have inherent inconsistencies between these, and we'll continue to have problems. So to go back to where we started this, the non-conforming provision is going to be key to how we deal with this. Next one, boathouses and covered dockage areas are buildings and shall not exceed the height of 10 feet above high tide, and it has a floor area limitation of 500 square feet. So here's a good provision, the numbers are fixed, there's no judgment that Mike has to make, and I just ask if you think those numbers are appropriate.
Mike, from a building, physical building perspective, on a boathouse, 10 feet's, is that high enough?
Yeah, 10 feet is decent because we actually measure half of the roof. So if you have a 8-foot building and a 4-foot tall roof, that's 12 feet, but it's only a 10-foot building.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we only take half of the gable.
There's a 2-story boathouse that just went in on Westlake a while ago.
Easily
One story
above
with
20
a
feet.
thing on it. a,
1 story with like an apartment up top.
Correct.
Right, and the one that Joel had before you was a 2-story boathouse. You made him remove the second floor for a lot of different reasons. And this would prevent that from occurring. Now, in his case, I think the height limit was still there, and he just said, I'll go get a variance. So herein is my criticism with, just go get a variance. Because a lot of applicants, I don't care what this says, I'm just gonna get a variance. I would rather
Yeah.
comply with this, and in the
Me-
rare
me
instance
too.
that you can, then you go get a variance. It shouldn't be the norm, it should be the exception.
Mike, explain again how you measure that height, please, for me.
All right, so when you have the roof,
A peaked roof.
a peaked roof, if you have a flat roof, it's to the flat roof. But if you have a peak, you take the average elevation from the eave to the peak, to the ridge.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
the middle, so you take half of the roof, basically, is what you take on a pitched roof.
Okay.
So if you have a boat lift, and the boat lift is attached, you have all that space in the eave
Yeah.
to,
That's correct.
Okay.
for
Thank
your
you.
boat lift.
If you had to lift your boat or anything
Right.
like that, you
Yeah.
could actually do it in the eve.
So then, in your opinion, 10 feet is enough? That's adequate?
Above the watermark? Sure.
Yeah.
That's the high watermark.
And same thing, Mike, so a 500-foot building, you think is a reasonable size for a boathouse?
I think that's
Or
large.
bathhouse?
That's big.
So I
10
think
by,
that's big too.
10 by 50, 20 by 25, that's a full 2-car garage on land.
That gives you context, the 2-car garage.
Yeah, I
That's
don't think-
large. I don't know if I would go that big.
No, I think we want to be able to fit, you know, we can find out the width of pontoon boats are wide, right? And we could put a few extra feet in, but I don't think we want these
Well, I
large.
think maybe there's two different things here. So there's a boathouse, which should, again, the same thing, reflect the average size of boats that use our lakes. Bathhouses, however, don't need to be that big. A bathhouse is a place where you knock the sand off your shoes and you change and you raise. It does not need to be as big as a boathouse theoretically. So perhaps there's two different structures. a boathouse provision and a bathhouse provision.
Actually, 500 square feet's not terrible if you had two boats. Right, because if it's 10 feet wide, you'd want 12 feet wide, so that's 24.
Yep.
And then 20 deep is a parking spot, so that would probably be approximately right if you wanted to allow two. I don't know if you want to allow one or two, but that's,
Well, I
So-
think ideally, oh, it's.
Well,
Go ahead.
I personally, I think one boathouse ought to be enough.
A lot of times a boathouse has a dock outside of it.
Yeah.
On each side.
and that's fine.
Yeah,
That's-
that
We're
is
talking about
fine.
the house itself.
Yep.
Next one is the length of the dock. That's the 25-foot provision we talked about earlier, 6 feet in width. The issue that we've encountered with that is the docks extending across property lines into neighboring properties. That becomes complicated. We've seen that many times.
Especially on the inside curve of a cove.
Right, exactly right. That's a good point. So once again, I think we just took numbers here without having a firm understanding of how many curved waterfront frontages do we have where that condition will exist. If it's 2 out of 1,000, not a big deal. If half of our waterfront properties are curving and have this potential conflict as the docks extend out beyond property lines, we ought to know that. So again, an issue of not enough data to make a good judgment with respect to this.
6 feet wide enough?
Yes.
Yeah?
The one that we went to that day
Yeah.
was 8 feet, I believe.
8 feet, the dock was 8 feet
Yeah,
wide?
and that was wide. The boat fit into it, if you remember.
Yeah, right.
They could pull the boat right into that spot.
Yeah.
And the big issue with respect to number 9 is 2 watercrafts.
So if I can talk to that issue for a second. There are two main themes running through this body of regulation, which are intended to reduce traffic on the lake. One is a numerical restriction on the number of boats. And I'm assuming these are power boats at this point, that they've cleaned that up.
Well, not, 'cause if you
Well, I
remember
know,
the
I
definition-
understand. But, you know, my assumption is,
Yep.
and certainly based on some town board comments, that they're going to clean up that definition. So what I'm saying now assumes that we're talking about power boats. So you have the numerical restriction, which is now 2 watercraft, and elsewhere, when you get to the ownership of Section H, it's basically you can't rent to other people. Right now, when you, under the existing zoning code, I took a look at it, and this was based on one of the comments that I saw that was sent over by the town. There's a provision now that basically prevents you from renting to somebody else. This is Article 156-27, Private Water-Related Facilities, Section B. The use of the site shall be limited to the owner or lessee and the immediate family or bona fide guests of such owner or lessee of parcel. So we've got an existing zoning code which limits the ability to rent dock space to others. And to my knowledge, it's never been enforced. We clearly heard from the public during the commenting sessions about this 2 watercraft limit as being problematic. People, you know, they own jets, a boat, and 2 jet skis or 3 jet skis. They have people over every once in a while. They're not out there using them all the time, but bottom line is they've invested good money in this equipment. My thought is that we should learn to walk before we run, and that given that there is an existing provision in the code on rentals that has never been enforced, it's been kind of upgraded in this new code. I don't think the town should adopt a numerical limit at this point without first seeing, and this is what I would call a conservative approach, without first seeing the effectiveness of enforcing the rental prohibition. Enforce that, see if you still have the problem, and you can always come back and adopt a numerical limit at a later point.
So let's just think about that practically. So if we rely simply on you can't rent your space to anybody else, but there's no sort of limit on the number of boats, how does Mike know that?
Well, it's
As
very,
opposed to a number of boats, when we can count the number of
it's
boats.
very easy. You go at 7 o'clock in the morning, you take the police boat around, and you stop at every dock, and you look at the registration number on the boat. And it's very easy to determine whether that person lives there or not. It's really easy.
It would be if I was allowed to run numbers.
Well, the police can.
You're gonna devote police time to running
Well, then they-
registration?
then,
I'm just asking.
well, how...
I'm not saying it's a bad idea.
No, what I'm saying is, how are you going, we have it in the code now, it's never been enforced. It's being tightened in the new regulations, the rental issue. If we don't think it can be enforced, then why is it going in there?
So if there's a registered vessel that's at somebody's house that's unexplained, then what? You have to go take a statement from the owner to find out whether or not, I mean,
No, you issue them a violation. You're parking a boat.
There's no way I'm gonna prosecute that.
So then why are we adopting these requirements?
Well, I agree, that we should tighten up the language, but I'm just
But
saying.
why tighten up the language if it's unenforceable?
It's not that it's unenforceable, it's not pragmatic, is basically what I'm trying to
If
say.
it's practically,
Just assigning, simply seeing a vessel that's docked, that, how are you gonna determine whether or not, if that vessel is not registered to that address, you automatically issue a violation?
that's what the rule says. You're not allowed to give access. This is what the new law says.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to
So-
give access to somebody at your dock unless you are the owner of that boat.
So in essence, it's not dissimilar to having unregistered vehicles parked at people's properties. There is a code provision for that. It is enacted. It's usually done by complaint. A systematic police review of the lake, I don't think is going to be very popular.
I guess my point is, if you believe that on a practical level, it's not going to be enforced, then why are we adopting any of this?
The way it's going to
Okay?
be enforced is when one neighbor calls the police on their other neighbor and says, there are 5 vessels here, please come out here and take a look at them, check the registrations. That's how it's going to get enforced.
But to my knowledge, it's never been enforced.
I agree with that.
Okay,
and-
so if it's never been enforced, and we think that these new rental restrictions are better than the old ones, let's enforce them as best we can. And if that doesn't stop traffic on the lake, then come back and adopt a numerical
So
limit.
all I would say, Bob, is that your argument makes sense, but to Joe's point, the practicality of enforcing the registration is harder than the practicality of counting 2 boats. It's a lot easier just to say, you're only allowed 2, you got 3. As opposed to, I don't know about the registration, the neighbor can't run the
But it seems,
registration.
but if you feel that the numerical limit is a better limit, a better way to do this, then get rid of the other one. You don't need both.
I think that's probably true. Maybe it is better to have both, I don't know. I don't know how Joe would prosecute this necessarily.
But you're saying belt and suspenders, but we're not even wearing any pants at this point.
That's a different story, I agree with that. So is there any, so let's put aside the registration issue, is there any appetite to talk about the number of boats?
2 is way too small.
Well, I think a lot of this was written, a lot of the meetings we've heard from is, and it's another thing to think about, right? There's been people speaking that says, what are we trying to fix here?
Yeah.
Are there really too many boats on the lake? Is it really too crowded? Last meeting, the gentleman spoke up about, I'm on a lake all the time. Monday through Friday afternoon, it's empty. Friday afternoon gets busy till Sunday Sunday afternoon. Saturday morning, Sunday morning are empty. So there's a time in the afternoons between Friday and Sunday, and the gentleman that spoke says, what are we trying to fix? So it's crowded at those times in the afternoons on Saturday and Sunday, maybe Friday afternoon, between, 4th of July and Labor Day, or Memorial Day and Labor Day. So I think we gotta think about that. Also, enforcement comes up several times, and the town really just says, look, we're not gonna get into enforcement on it right now, which I understand.
So one of the things
That's
I'm sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
Okay. And I've said it before, the lakes in this town are our biggest draw, our biggest treasure, our biggest resource. You want to use them, you want people using them, because then they're gonna pull up and they're gonna go to lunch, and they're gonna spend money in town. So, there was a mix of people, but the consensus was it really isn't as crowded as everybody wants people to believe.
So I look at this from my planner's perspective. So we deal with this, for example, with respect to traffic, right? There's a traffic study, there's empirical data that says that intersection doesn't operate properly. We don't have any empirical data that the lake's operating in a crowded manner. So again, I'm defaulting to, is there data that can say, no, there aren't a lot of boats except for Sunday afternoon between 1 and 4?
One of the comments, or a number of the comments, focused on the fact that the town had said that the survey that they had done during the comprehensive plan process was the basis.
I don't think that was the same thing, Bob. I think that was a lot of opinions.
No, what I'm saying is that that those survey questions, there were a couple questions in there, and the results of that question were, some number of people complained about it being crowded. The rejoinder from a lot of commenters was, I never got the survey, I never answered the question.
but
So let me just finish. One of the things that the town might consider is redoing a much more drilling down survey, hear me out, just hear me out. Addressed to the residents of the Lake Park District, asking them their views on this, mail it out so this way we know they get it, and so it comes
I love
back.
getting public input. That's a great idea, but I'm saying do a traffic study on the lake. That's what I'm saying. I don't want opinions of folks. I want a boat traffic guy to tell me the lake's crowded, or it's
So
not crowded.
let's table the discussion on this.
Before we, because touch on, Pat, I think that's a really good idea, because unfortunately, if you ask 10 people, it's a very subjective question. What may be busy to me is not busy to John.
That's why the survey is interesting.
Yeah, but it's not this positive. I think what you brought up is really the way we should go, is maybe suggest to the town board, hey, let's have somebody look at this from a practical point of view and give us an opinion.
I'd like to open the meeting, continue the meeting with what's on our agenda, and come back to at least close on the lake and the docks part tonight, all right, after. Okay, second on tonight's agenda is Vittorini Brian, 6 Pheasant Place for a resolution. Mike, I don't believe you nor Rich had any comments.
I do not.
Rich, did you have any comments on this?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Which one was this again?
Vittorini?
Vittorini, we should be good.
And Pat.
And you have a approval resolution before you, Mr. Chair. Rich did sign off on it.
I did.
So, for the board point of view, we've looked at this for a few meetings now. The fill was, I think that what was key about this is the fill was certified clean. That's something we've had an issue with in the past. If no one's got any other questions, we need a motion to adopt the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer the resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 22-22, December 8th, 2022, for tax map 54.16-1-40, Vittorini regrading plan.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. We've had several reviews of this. It was not necessary to do anymore. Thank you. Next on the agenda, Platinum Propane, 1035 Route 6. Mike, I believe there's comments from you?
Yeah, the applicant submitted a fire safety analysis for the site. The plans provide for 2 buried 30,000-gallon tanks, but the front page shows an above-ground tank. I'm just wondering if they kept that consistent in, across the board there. Provide labeled floor plans of each floor. They gave me floor plans of the existing building, but none of the rooms are labeled what they're gonna use them for. I wasn't sure if that was gonna be a house or offices. If it's gonna be a residence, they need a use variance from the zoning board. Variances required from ZBA for front yard and minimum floor area.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Rich?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have my memo, but I'm going to just go through the, quickly go through the letter that Insight had provided. Do you have mine, Mike?
You want your
So-
memo? I have it.
Was that, you have it, Ray?
Take it. I thought I gave you. Oh, I don't have one. I don't have this.
Sorry. Richard, a page of comments here. Patrick.
So the one comment I did have was, I'm still reviewing the SWIP. It looks like it's moving forward. It's good. Site variances, ZBA, they have to go to, where are we with this now? Area disturbance was there. Plantings, all the notes and detailed comments have been addressed. The applicant has noted all the comments, and they just need to, the only thing we have to talk about is possibly dealing with the traffic study. They don't want to do it. They're going to defer to the New York State DOT in their review of the site, which they're going to have, the DOT has to be there to check this out. So that will be a board decision if they want to just rely on New York State DOT's judgment on it, which would be wise, or if they want to have their own, if we want to have our own traffic study there.
Wouldn't it be the same traffic study for us as well as for the state?
For Baldwin,
You mentioned a traffic study.
yes.
They didn't want to do a traffic study?
They're recommending that they don't have to do it because they're going to be deferring to the state DOT because of where it is on the road. It's right next to the one next to Nicole
Well,
Lake.
and the DOT had some issues with, as we did with the last one.
Correct.
Right, and they would do their own
Okay.
independent review.
Okay.
So just to put that, just follow up on Rich's point, Adam clarified 4 trucks operating out of the site and 1 delivery a week. So the big concern was, is this a terminal, we're gonna have hundreds of trips all the time? That was clarified at the last.
So how many trips per day are you estimating?
I think we were thinking that there would be a bulk delivery to the site. I believe we said once a week. And then the up to 4 was essentially for the rest of the week.
So- Maybe I'm getting ahead of us, but,
Yep.
so can you take us through?
So just let Mike,
Yeah, go ahead.
get my comments. So this was last before you in May,
Mhm.
and it was that time when they responded to all your most of your initial comments. So if you remember, we were sort of
Yeah.
concerned about how it would operate, how you'd maneuver through the site, what it was all about. There were 2 issues, and they clarified everything. They added more landscaping, did a good job of modifying the site plan in response to your initial comments. The biggest question we had at the time was, who regulates propane facilities? Does this come to the DEC or the health department? And Adam has researched that apparently, and there are no separate propane facility regulations. So other than the installation of the equipment itself, this is a site plan approval. There's no other approval from a different agency because it's a propane distribution facility, which was an important issue for us. And there was one other issue that I had, a minor issue, which was they provided some details on the lighting plan, but if you can give us illumination levels, because this might be a facility that needs to be secure, so you might have high-intensity lights on there, which would be a concern to us. So if you could clarify that, that would be helpful. So those were my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Can you take us through the, I remember you being here quite a while ago, but can you take us through like the business model? So who are you selling to? How's this operating? What exactly are you doing? Nothing residential, I believe, was it residential? Take us through the whole business model.
Yeah, so I'm going to defer on operations and propane-related questions. I'm Adam Thyberg, Insight Engineering, Surveying, Landscape Architecture. and I'm joined by Mike Villardo of Platinum Propane and Stacy Silvers of Hiltz Propane Systems. So I'm going to defer to them on operations-related and propane-related questions. I did want to just quickly touch on a couple of items, and we'll certainly circle back to the operations and business model as you had asked about. With this latest submission, we've obviously provided a lot more material. The only significant change with regard, just to give a quick summary of the changes in the site plan, the only significant change in the site plan is that we've moved the tanks, and that was to comply with the required setbacks from the school that's associated with the church that's on the neighboring property. Other than that, the site plan has not changed. I think I'm going to come back and respond to some of the comments from the consultants so we can circle back to your question about the operations. Mike, do you want to just speak to that?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Michael Villardo, one of the owners of Platinum Propane. So our intent of the property to use is to buy in bulk, so we can buy it at a Selkirk price point, wholesale, and we're looking to sell it retail to our customers. We're not looking to have a wholesale operation.
So you sell retail
To houses.
so you'll be making lots of trips back and forth?
I would probably say once the truck leaves for the day, it's pretty much gone for the day.
Okay.
Then it'll come back and fill up for the next day.
What about deliveries that fill your bulk storage tank?
We plan on getting like one delivery a week. We don't see us growing, as of right now, I don't see us growing into a massive operation, just
One delivery a week is one 18-wheeler, 3?
one 18-wheeler.
How many trucks would you be running?
We currently have 2 trucks.
Two.
And your office use is going to be in that front building?
We're gonna have the office and storage in the front building, correct?
Adam, can you move this so we can see the renderings? I saw you. Thank you.
Just
That
to,
structure, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mike. Just to respond to a couple of the other comments, we can definitely label up the uses of the individual rooms. There's not going to be any major renovation to the existing building. It's simply going to be converted to an office as was mentioned. But we can definitely label that drawing. And again, this will not be for residential use, which I think was
So the
one of your-
kitchen's going to go, showers will go, you're not going to keep it as okay, thank you.
Correct. And just to clarify on the traffic question, we were looking to defer jumping into a traffic study right now because as we continue to make progress, one of our next steps is going to be to go to the New York State DOT for highway work permit. The project is obviously, it's on Route 6, so any work in that driveway is going to require a New York State DOT highway work permit. In that process, they're going to take a look at all of those items relative to traffic. So that's what, we're not looking to not address the traffic, we're just looking to have it covered under that same umbrella. And then the couple other things that I'd picked up on in the comments is, we'll certainly provide a photometric plan. And Stacy can speak a bit more to this with regard to the light level requirements that you had mentioned. I believe the requirements just read that the lighting needs to be satisfactory or sufficient. It's more subjective, and there isn't a set foot candle that you need to hit. So obviously, we're going to look to balance having a sufficient safety with also not having it overly lit, for the neighbors.
The tanks will be in a secure fenced-in area?
Yes.
So the tanks are above ground, the memo says, I'm not sure if it's
Nope.
above or below.
No,
The
these-
tanks, sorry.
These are going to be buried. They'll be underground, but the area that they're in will be fenced off, and you'll see that on the site plan.
The tank that they showed on the report was an above-ground tank, and I just wanted to clarify
That's where I was
that.
going.
On the
they're
cover,
same.
on the
Correct.
cover,
And
yeah.
That's
That's fine. It was just the original one did show an above-ground tank.
So is that industry norm? I mean, typically today, you don't want fuel oil tanks buried in the ground. Do you want propane? Is best practices burying the propane tanks as compared to it's not with oil tanks?
You typically see them buried. The applicant did seek the advice of the fire chief on this, and they were kind of open to it either way, for the purposes of just having it out of sight, and just because it is the typical practice that these tanks are buried. That's the direction that the applicant's looking to go.
So our fire chief's been out there?
Yes.
Questions from the board?
Right, so, Mr. Chairman, just to touch base on the traffic, so that's still not completed yet because they still have to work with the DOT. So that driveway may move, the profile may move a little, and Adam, you can attest to that. It may be tweaked a little bit, so just want to let the board know that while you're looking at a drawing and a rendering that's there right now, it may be changed based on DOT comments. Just want to let them.
Well,
Yeah, it may be wider, right, as Mike's saying, it might be wider, it may be flatter. So again, that all depends on what we have to do with the DOT, so just keep that in mind as you move.
well, the last applicant, we spent months with the DOT coming to a resolution.
Right,
And we had to move the building.
right, exactly.
Just to speak to one other item on the DOT topic is that we have met with them on site. They've taken a look. They agree that the current location of the driveway, which is where we're showing it entering or coming off of Route 6 here, they agree that that is the best location for the driveway. And to Rich's point, the basic geometry might change a little bit. They have certain design guidelines for how the geometry of that entrance works, but the location is not going to move based on having met them and them agreeing that that's really the spot for it.
Questions from the board?
Does the DOT, do they issue a report when they give you an approval for the driveway?
They'll go through a series of comments. There's a series of steps where you respond to certain questions, and they will study it, and then they provide comments at each stage along the way in response to the
Do you
information
think
that
we
we
should
provide.
ask them to provide that to the board so we
So
can?
like the other one, the DOT's input would have, as we talked about, could affect improvements on the site. So we should know what they're thinking about. Your approval would be conditioned on the DOT issuing that permit.
Correct, yeah.
But we need to know what they would issue the permit for.
Yeah.
So getting some feedback directly from DOT would be useful.
Would you be agreeable to provide that information?
Of course, yeah. Well, any correspondence with the DOT will copy the board and the consultants on that, certainly.
Great.
I do want to just reemphasize something that was brought up by the consultants, that our next step here is to seek, in addition to starting to interact with the DOT on this and the highway work permit, is to seek the 2 variances that are required. We have 2 pre-existing conditions on the site. As the board is aware, the square footage of the existing building does not meet the 5,000 square foot minimum for the commercial zone, and the front yard setback is also a pre-existing non-conforming condition. We do need to seek those 2 variances, so we're hoping that the board will refer us for those 2 variances tonight.
Other questions from the board? Pat, the next, considering we might probably want another meeting this month, and then we're into the second week in January. We can in parallel send this off to the,
Nothing that they're proposing would affect those pre-existing variances. They're pre-existing conditions.
right,
Nothing we do would change anything.
right. So we could send it off when it comes back to us regardless, because I really don't want to go too far with that, the DOT, because I remember how involved the DOT was on our last project. I mean, literally moved the building, right? So I'm personally okay with sending it off to the zoning board, it comes back to us, and then we review it, and hopefully you have some feedback with the DOT. We won't approve this until we hear from the DOT, so.
Of course.
That Adam is telling us the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm willing to do things in parallel.
And you're definitely taking the dwelling unit out.
Yes, there will be no dwelling. The existing building to be converted to an office.
Perfect. Then I have no problem with it either.
Yeah, I think we can do things in parallel, knowing there's only gonna be one meeting this month.
With that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to refer this to the ZBA.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is M&L and RNC Properties, 310 Bucks Hollow Road.
By the DA.
Mike?
Yeah, can't read any of the title block on A 100, 101, 102, 200, 201, 202. I don't know if he shrunk it down or what, but it's so small that I couldn't even see what it said in there. Putnam County Department of Health approval is necessary for this proposal. Sprinkler system will be required. It's a 4-story wood frame structure, and a use variance is required from the ZBA for the expansion of the non-conforming 10, I think it's a 10-family house now, or 9 and 1 family house.
It's 2 buildings.
Correct. So they're going to need a use
It's
variance
2
for the
buildings.
expansion.
Joe, can you enlarge that, what Mike has described? That would be kind of difficult to read. I agree with Mike on that. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The application involves legalizing 2 fourth-floor studio apartments at the referenced property. Additional details should be provided regarding parking spaces. This includes, but is not limited to, striping lengths, widths, travelways, proximity to property lines, guide rails, etc. Project should be referred to the Mahopac Fire Department. The reference is not in a town sewer or water district. It's unclear if the well and septic have sufficient capacity for these additional rooms, and if the Putnam County Department of Health has reviewed and approved these rooms. So that's something that will need to be done.
Pat?
So Rich really touched on the issues. This is an existing facility, and there have been 2 additional units built in the upper level, but it's always been a multifamily building. The parking lot is sort of an informal parking lot. There's one large curb cut on the side road. There's not a discrete curb cut. And then the parking is kind of informal in 2 different areas, one in the back and one in the front. So to Rich's point, Joel is taking credit for more than required parking. Needs to be striped, needs to be dimensionally compliant, needs to be shown on the plan and on the property as well. The question of the curb cut is something you want to think about. So there have been instances where an existing unregulated curb cut warrants a curb cut. So you should think if this operates appropriately currently or needs to be better defined with that curb cut. Rich talked about the bigger issue, which is there adequate sewer and water to serve this? So there's a lot of units in this building. It's not connected to public sewer and water. So the increase in density, even the original density, is it adequate? So that's kind of a fundamental question that we've touched on with respect to the comprehensive plan, and we should look at all of these projects the same way. The only other thing that I would say is and this is not a criticism, but apartments that have been constructed illegally, were the electrical permits filed, and were any other building code issues illegally improved as a result of that? So there should be some confirmation that everything that's in the building is code compliant.
Before I turn it over to the board, Joel, you want to take us through that, especially that last point that Pat mentioned?
As was mentioned by the consultants, there is a well and septic. There's no town sewer, no town water in this particular project.
I'm
Project
sorry,
located-
can you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
No, that was on, I just,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
You were
As-
saying something about the town water and.
Right. There's a well and septic on the site. There's no town water or town sewer in this particular area. As was mentioned by the consultants too, there is a parking lot up front here which is paved, and there's a parking lot in the back, and rightfully so. If we can get the use variances, obviously we'll have to come back and prove that all these parking spaces work, but we do have in excess, we require 20, and we have about 26 parking spaces. And Mike is absolutely, and the consultants are right. Obviously, this also has to go before the Putnam County Board of Health, and most important, because this is a non-conforming use, we have to get a use variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I would request that while we're going through the machinations of going to the Health Department and getting all their approvals, if we could get on the Zoning Board agenda, if we don't get the use variances, project doesn't go anyplace. So if we could at least get to that point, and the Zoning Board, obviously, we've missed the December meeting, so we're not going to be on until January. So that at least let's find out if we get the use variance, and then all the comments, plus the Putnam County Health Department would have to be addressed and approved if we get the use variances. But
Joel, you
that's-
should definitely show the parking first to make sure you at least comply.
Sure, no problem.
Otherwise, why go to zoning board to come back to find out you don't comply and have to go back to
Well,
zoning?
I mean, I've been out to the site. I did not mark it, that's correct, but the parking spaces are, there's more than 20 legitimate parking spaces.
There's
Show
20
us.
There's 20 parking spaces in the, I'll call it the main parking lot. Then there's a parking lot in the back.
Right.
That's dirt, right?
Yes.
So you're saying 20 in the front and 6 in the back? Is that how you have?
Just about, yes.
Well, exactly how?
Well, yeah, there's, there's 7 spaces in the back and 19 in the front.
So just to point out, Joel, you're showing 4 spaces that are tandem, which would require a variance right now.
Correct.
So that's the point, Mike's point.
And the gravel spots, too.
Okay, I mean,
They have to be improved. So if you just show us everything laid out properly, this way we get you there one time, we don't keep sending you back and forth. That's all we're trying to do.
okay, thank you.
And then if they need to be improved, you'd need the details for that, for driveway and, you know, when you're doing the asphalt and whatnot, so.
But again, to repeat myself, all the stuff will be done. If we don't get the use variance, the project is dead.
But what I think you're hearing the consultant say is, provide us with the data, something that that's a very small map, but provide us with everything so that we could help speed. I mean, the idea of, in my mind, if we have non-conforming studio apartments, that's good for us. We want that to come forward, and we want to improve that, make sure that's safe.
Sure, absolutely.
So, just from that alone, but you need to provide the data to the consultants and to us so that we can send it over with the positive comments to the zoning board.
Okay.
Now, Pat, you mentioned that when, this is an opportunity to look at the rest of the building, you said. Who's gonna go look at the rest of the building? You mentioned something about.
So ordinarily, well, this is Mike's call, but ordinarily Joel would submit something to Mike demonstrating compliance.
Yeah, I think the board has, but we've done the floor plans and the elevations of the entire building, but your point is well taken. We'll find out from the owner whether or not all the electrical has been inspected by a licensed electrician. And,
I mean, again, we have an opportunity to bring us up to compliance, that's good.
No
That's,
problem.
you know.
okay,
Yeah, we do a fire inspection every year. They actually scheduled it the other
think
day.
there's one-
So it's something that my fire inspector has been going out there on a regular basis doing the fire inspections for the rest of the units.
has the 2 apartments been inspected, as far as you know?
I don't know if that's how this came up. Is this the last, I think that's how it came up last time. When Joe was out there, he saw the additional units, and that's how it came up.
Mike, the reason it came up is because we just bought the building, and then the bank.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, come on.
For the people on TV, that's the only reason, but I could hear you, but.
Sorry, introduce yourself. Rich Caprio, one of the partners in MLR State Properties. What happened, this is Mike Lupick sitting down behind me. What happened was we bought the building, it came up on a C of O. Previously, this property's been inspected for years. It's been like this for a while when we bought it. So then when it came up on a C of O, the bank came back and said you have to legalize the apartment. That's what brings us here today.
And that's goodness, as I've been mentioning, that's goodness for us. We
Yes.
want to legalize apartment, we want.
And we want to legalize, that's
Yeah,
why we're
yeah,
spending
yeah.
this money and my time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Questions here?
Yeah, I've got, just to, you've gentleman just kind of alluded to it. I'm interested in understanding the history of how we got
Can
here.
you talk a little bit louder? I can't hear you.
Hear me now?
That's better.
Better.
Okay, I'm interested in understanding the history of how we got here. 2 apartments that need to be legalized, how long have they been that way? And
Well-
and how did we end up with 9 or 10 units in a residential zoning district.
Well,
multi-fa-
to the best
So
of
if
my
I could just
knowledge-
understand the
The history of the building.
history of the
Not that
building-
these gentlemen owned it, but just the history.
Right,
from
as
what-
far as we know, when these gentlemen bought it, the two apartments that Mike was talking about on the third floor were existing. And I guess because
how
of the
long?
bank reviewing it, realized that those two apartments were not legalized. That's how this, and I guess inspection from the fire inspection from the town also inspected and discovered that those two apartments were not legalized anyway. That's why we're here. So as far as we know,
The question is,
yeah, well,
what's this?
Mike, do you know how long the apartments have been up there?
I can attest to, how are you, Michael Lubick? I can attest to this because this property actually started with my family in the 50s. My great-uncle owned it when they first came to Mahopac from Brooklyn. That was my Uncle Mario. He sold it to my Uncle Kevin, who had quite the interesting stay at the apartment building over years. Somewhere along the lines, someone added those apartments. I'm assuming it's probably a family member of mine who did add those apartments years back. I'm talking probably 20 plus years ago. At some point, Johnny and Nikki Greco from Villa Brone bought the property as is, totally redid it, put $1 million into it, kept it as is, sold it to us. So going back to when Johnny and Nikki bought it, those two were there.
So when the apartments were put in, it sounded like 20, 30 years ago.
Yes.
Was that legal at the time?
I have no idea.
How
It
do we
may
know
have-
they're
it may have
legal?
even been
How do we
before
know
that.
they're legal today, is I guess my question.
Legally, there's some.
How do we know they are legal?
How do we know?
Yeah.
The C of O came up without those being noticed by the town. So the CO actually kicked them back to us through the bank.
Yeah, so what we do is we look at the old assessor's records, and the old assessor's record said X amount of, and I don't remember the exact number, so, and it turns out there's 2 extra units there, more than what they were supposed to have.
So the original units, the 10 units that we're talking about, those are legal?
Legal.
They are?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I'm...
Yes, yes. And then when they purchased, there was a search done.
Yeah,
and
that
an
I
inspection,
understand.
And everything comes up at that
But
point.
it's been like this for 20, 30 years already.
Yeah.
So I think what the board's asking here is you just clean up the application and bring it forward.
All right, we said, we want to get you to the ZBA, but in order to get you to the ZBA, the discussion was, do a little bit more work on the drawings with the parking.
Understood.
This way you don't get kickback from the ZBA a second, you know, we're trying to keep you there, we'll get you there once.
And also, I think that Mike will also, on the application, just repeat the history of the
Yeah, I mean, it's information, I found the information, what Mike just said, so.
Make it full size so we could read it.
And at the end of the day, you'll speed up the process if you give us some more information.
Even the map should be a little larger. It was kind of hard to see that, too.
So
Yeah,
Pat,
Joel, you gotta give us full size.
Pat, can you
That's tough.
explain to the applicant, I've been through this a few times, why you talk about curb cut and how the driveway is wide open now?
Yep, so it regulates the movement of vehicles in and out of your property, especially close to an intersection. Ordinarily, we have a defined driveway, right? So that's a safe way to enter and exit the site. When you have 75 feet along your full driveway, you can enter and exit the site anywhere. It's not an unsafe, it's typically an unsafe condition, particularly close to an intersection. So that's typically why we may want to have it defined in and out.
Joe could help you with that, too. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
You too.
Good night.
Next on the agenda for subdivision is Jedlicka, 334 Austin Road. Mike, I believe you had some comments as well as Rich and Pat.
Yeah, open development approval is required from the town board for proposed lot number 2. There's no frontage on a town, county, or state highway. Variance was granted by the ZBA because lot 1 depth line exits and re-enters the lot. Just provided graphic scale, the regular scale is on there, but we asked for the bars just to show us what's on there. I don't know why the surveyor didn't put it on.
Okay.
Prior to signing the final plat, certification by an engineer or surveyor as to the accuracy of the plat must be provided, and provide an easement agreement for review by council.
Done.
Good.
Okay,
Rich.
just so you understand, the drawing that I submitted we had signed, it's been signed by the Putnam County Health Department. So the plat is correct, and it's been signed, it was signed a couple of days ago by the Putnam County Health Department.
Understood, it has to be signed by a surveyor or an engineer at the
Well,
end.
it's
It's there, it's just
it's
not
here,
signed.
it's right here. It's signed and sealed by the engineer.
Okay, mine wasn't.
Okay. Well, no, the reason is, that I just picked it up yesterday from the health
Okay,
department.
I just want to let you know, mine wasn't.
How did the health department sign this before we approved it?
They have to. You can't approve this without health department approval.
So we never even got you past the sketch plan of development, so you went to health department, you went to the health department, right?
Yeah.
Rich, your comments?
So, this has been a process, we got all the comments addressed, I just need to have, as we move forward, just a performance bond and associated engineering fee to be developed and provided and approved on my end, so.
Okay, no problem.
And Pat?
So we have a seeker-related issue with respect to this procedurally, so double-checked with Rose. We never established lead agency for this application, and because it requires open development from the town board, seeker has to be completed before they can grant open development. We could do an uncoordinated review theoretically and adopt a neg deck now, but that means the town board would have to do its own seeker review, and they don't want to do that. They've never done that before. They would usually ask us to do that for them. That being the case, we can designate lead agency this evening, but we couldn't yet adopt a neg deck until the 30 days runs.
You're kidding. Oh, my God.
A seeker provision, for some reason, no one addressed this at the last appearance before the board.
And like you
We've
said,
been
the
here
town board's not
numerous
gonna want
times.
it. The town board's not gonna want it, so we should declare ourselves lead agency so we can get this completed.
So-
And
so
there's
I-
no issue with this, that there is no
I know, it's
substantive
just a
issue.
matter of more time, and
Yeah,
which
it
is
is.
really unconscionable. Really.
Well,
We've been here many times.
okay, you should have asked to designate the agency at the time, Joel. I mean,
Isn't that the board's job?
It's the applicant's job to
Fine.
request an action of.
All right, so what's the next step then?
You can
We're
designate.
gonna designate lead agency. It is the applicant's job to bring that forward, so we'll designate ourselves as lead
I've never,
agency.
I'm not gonna.
And look, we wanna speed this along.
Well,
We,
let's speed it up then.
you know,
So, Joel, what I would say is, you can ask the town board to accept this agency, you have to wait the 30 days. So we could put you on the next agenda, but you need the town board to consent to this board being lead agency. You don't have
But
to
also,
wait.
I'd like to, and the next meeting is not till January, I'd like to get, schedule the public hearing and get a final approval. And in the meantime, the town board's, I'm sure, going to be meeting several times between now and whatever January, the second Thursday of January.
There's no more meetings for the town board.
Oh, the
There's one
town
more
board is
meeting
out of
next,
business?
next week, there's one more meeting, it is just a voting meeting.
Yeah.
You could theoretically ask to request to be on that meeting, I guess, if it's up to the board, I don't know the process. But other than that, the next meeting would be the organizational meeting in early January, then the first Wednesday after that. That's how the board would be operating.
So
The
what you're
town
saying is
board.
they have one more voting meeting, so. if
They
I
have a
get on
meeting
that-
next Wednesday.
If I
Yeah,
get on
if
that
the-
meeting and the board approves it, then I can have my public hearing in January,
No,
correct?
in that meeting, you can ask the town board to consent to this board being the lead agency. So you don't have to wait the 30 days to allow that to happen. So after that, then this board can adopt its neg deck at the next meeting.
But could we also have the public hearing, get a final approval?
You don't have open development yet, so you
But
can open the public
Pat,
hearing.
assuming that before the second meeting, the second Thursday of January, that we're on that agenda for a public hearing, and if we get our open development before that, why wait another 2 weeks? I mean,
So you
it's
could
never
op-
going to
You can
stop.
schedule a public hearing. You may not be able to close it, depends on what
That's
happens,
fine,
but you could
but schedule it.
yeah, if all the data is in,
What's that?
Twice.
I'm sorry?
Two trips to the town board, one to ask them to allow them to be lead agency, and the second one for the open development.
Well, hopefully hopefully we can do that in one meeting. Let's find out.
And when you come back here, if you ask, I don't know if it would be the public hearing and resolution at that time.
could
I
do that.
assume
I'm
if you
okay
could.
with speed, I'm okay with doing the public hearing and resolution the same night. Pat, I want to just go back a step for the folks here. Yes. Can you just do a overview of a secret review process, what it is for the applicant?
So an environmental approval has to accompany the subdivision approval. It's a separate law. And in order for a board to make that decision, they have to, what's called designate their intention to be the lead agency, the person that makes that decision. That process is established in the state law, and it typically requires a vote, which they'll do in a couple of minutes, and then that notice gets circulated to the other agencies that have an involvement in this. And the code says you have to wait 30 days. What we're suggesting is Joel can go next week and shorten that by asking. And at that point, this board can then make the environmental decision, which I'm telling you, there are no environmental issues with respect to this. This is just a procedural issue. So there's no concern. It's just, that's the way the process works. If we didn't follow these rules, the approval that both boards would grant would be defective. So anybody could challenge it. It would be, you'd be in a difficult position. So you want the board to do it legally. So this is the best way we can get you to that point.
And the reason in the past, thank you, the reason in the past why this didn't go through on your first time is because both lots don't have frontage onto Austin Road.
We understand that.
And that requires use variance, right? Which requires a town to.
Open development.
Open development, which requires a town review. We, this board, can't, nor do we really want to send anything to the town approval until all the Ts are crossed. It's the right thing to do. We didn't make sure our ducks are in order before we asked the town supervisor.
All right, so tonight you'll declare lead agency, notify the town board that you've done that, and if for some reason I can get the town board to accept that and give me a resolution, we can have a public hearing in January.
No, you have
The
to,
town board has to consent first.
That's what I just said. I just said that.
Don't
I
yell
said-
at me.
Huh?
the first one's a consent, the second one's the request for the open development.
So we have to go in
Well-
front of the town board twice. And what you guys say.
Well, you need to use a microphone because the people on,
She just wants to know how many times we have to go to the town board.
Unless Greg finds a different way to do it 2 times. That's the.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, and talk to Greg, maybe that you can do the designation, the confirmation of lead agency and grant open development at the same time.
That's what our goal is,
I
yes.
think they can, but
Okay.
that'd be up to Greg.
All right, well, so if you declare lead agency, at least I can get to the town board. If they want to do it in one meeting, fine. If not, then we'll worry about it. But at least schedule the public hearing so we can move ahead in January.
so we're going to declare lead agency.
Yep, you can do that.
Do we need a motion for that?
Motion.
I'll make a motion to declare the planning board as the lead agent on this project.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And we'll, assuming the public hearing goes well, we'll do a resolution at the same time. that
Okay, thank you. And also, you'll get a notification to the town board about...
Joel, I can't hear, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said you'll get a notification for the
So
town
our
board before their
resolution
meeting?
will be transmitted to the town board, and ordinarily, they wait 30 days, not do anything, which means they're clear. What you're gonna do is ask next week, can I be on your agenda to say, please, let the planning board be the lead agency? They have to make a motion, they have to consent to be, for these guys to be lead agency.
And if possible, they can also approve it.
That's a separate issue, so yeah,
Okay.
they can certainly do the secret.
All right, so if you get that-
Joel has to make that.
Joel has to make that appeal.
Yep,
What's that?
You have to make that request.
Oh, I will.
yep.
Don't worry about that.
But Joel, make sure it's 2 trips, just so you understand. They can't do it both in the same night.
Why?
Joe's telling us that it's a two-part process.
In all likelihood, it's gonna be a 2-part process because they're gonna have to consent to the planning board being lead agency in one shot and then come back for the actual open development permit. Or-
They can't do it subject to?
You're gonna have to ask the town attorney. I'm just saying, prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
That's
it.
what I was saying before you yelled at me.
I can't even see you. I had to yell just to make sure you heard my voice.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Hopefully we get all this accomplished. Have a great holiday season, enjoy, and have a happy new year, and we'll see you the second Thursday.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you very much.
He's boisterous because he's hiding behind this plan.
Next on the agenda for the extension of the site plan approval is the Fairways Multifamily Lot 7, 2054 Route 6. Mike, no comments?
Which one's first?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I jumped over to 6. Yeah, well,
Gateway,
Gateway first,
Gateway,
Gateway Summit.
I have no objection to the extension of site plan approval.
You're talking about Gateway, right, Mike?
Gateway.
Rich?
Ditto.
The one you were on top of things, good thing you caught that. And Pat, you know? This is for an extension for 1 year, do we have a motion?
Before we do that, I would like to ask, for the record, why another a one-year extension?
Nope.
No.
You had a 50-50 chance.
Try the other one.
Let's try turning it on. Okay, so, well, we were here earlier this year and got approval for the multifamily, okay? And so we're looking for an extension for that, for site plan approval for that. And as the board is aware, or you may not be aware, the subdivision road, the G&F subdivision road is currently under construction. So we can't start construction on this site until the road is, the road and its infrastructure is substantially complete, because they're not going to be able to get in there to do construction. So we're just looking for another extension, give us some more time until that happens.
What
That's all.
is the anticipated completion of the road
Um,
and the infrastructure?
So I don't have the exact date. Of course, construction goes as it goes, but we're figuring probably in the spring. But we're looking for a 1-year extension.
There's some
at that
major
point.
road work going on there.
There's
right
some,
now.
they're doing earthwork.
Did you see that,
They're,
John?
they're a long ways from getting anything in the ground, and yeah, it's major earthwork, so. And of course, Fairways is similar, but we'll talk about that when we get there.
That's a good question, because
It is a good
this is
question.
the first time we've seen some movement there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a different situation.
Yeah.
What's being done.
Right. You know, yeah, they'll be moving forward, clearly. We're building the road, just not ready to,
Okay.
yeah, looking for another
Actually, it's the first
extension.
time we've seen some activity up there for a long time, which is nice to see.
It's good activity too,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman. You can see from the road, that's actual real work. That's
Yeah.
not busy work to scare you or make you happy. That's real work. You can tell where they're cutting in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the update.
John, you want to make a motion to?
Yeah, and of course, what we're
to
looking
grant
for
the
is
extension?
12 months from the expiration date, which is February 22nd.
In that spirit, Mr. Chairman, I
February
would
23rd.
ask to,
What's that?
in that spirit, I would like to make a motion that we grant that extension, sir.
It's a 1-year extension. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
And then next, same address is a Fairways multifamily, 2054 Route 6, Lot 7, extension of site plan approval.
Is this the same reason? The
Yes,
road? Okay.
absolutely. Right. Yeah, the road for Gateway Summit is somewhere in here, and this is Fairways, comes generally after that. But yeah, it still needs the road.
We need, any comments from Pat, Mike, Rich? If not, we need an extension.
I have no objection to the extension of site plan approval.
Ditto.
Okay, all in favor? John?
Well, sir, I wasn't, for the record, I was not going to make a motion until Mr. Carnazza was done because he's sitting behind me. I'm kind of scared of him. But now that he's given his comments, sir, in that spirit, I'd like to make a motion to grant this one as well, sir, for 1 year.
I'll
Second.
Second by Kim, all in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rose distributed the minutes of October 13th. I believe they were reviewed by Bob. Do we have a motion to accept?
I make a motion to accept, subject to the very, very minor comments that I made.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to continue. Good night, Rich.
I thought Mr. Clear was backing up. I got scared.
I'd like to go back and continue our conversation. Sure.
I'm now on the record, sure. I know I'm going. Thank you for the happiness. Now you're suspect number uno.
I got no comments.
You have a lot of notes. I love all your lines going up and down and over.
way too much mirth over there. I think you're hiding behind this plant.
Put it behind the receptionist, right? Yeah. Yeah, you and I did it.
Okay, let's get back to the comprehensive master plan. Pat, I believe you're still on docks and water?
We can take advantage of them now.
Number 9?
We were on number 9, so this was the big issue about number of watercraft. So again, my position was we sort of need data with respect to this. Where did the two come from? Again, this links back to watercraft being defined as everything, so it's canoes and kayaks considered a watercraft. So clearly 2 is a very, very restricted number, the way it's defined today.
I think earlier on, when we started this, we ourselves defined, what, or either that or was at one of the meetings, defined watercraft as motor vehicles.
What about air?
Air?
Simultaneous
Sailboat?
air and water? Oh.
I'm sorry?
Sailboat? Should be propelled by other than human.
Yeah, we never really.
We did, back when we talked about the definition of watercraft. I had recommended that anything that is other than air or human-powered.
Okay, so air.
Somebody
would be-
has a sunfish on the
Remember
lake.
human
Yeah,
power.
You know.
I think we go to the intent of writing this, it was about, in some people's minds, crowds on the lake. I don't think I don't think the lake lends itself to sailboats on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon during prime time being out in the lake. It's just, you never see, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of boats out there, kind of tough to sail, but if, I would define watercraft personally as motor vehicle.
So why don't we
But-
just rewrite it as
Motorized.
motorized craft?
Fine, yeah, I mean, it's
You
up
know
for
what I mean? So
discussion.
This way
about
it's
other
clear, it's
fields.
not
Yep.
up for decision, because it could be electric boats coming soon.
Agreed.
That's a fair point, Mike.
Yep.
Well, that's still motorized.
That's still.
Agreed.
That's, yeah, it's
That's what I mean.
It's not propelled by human.
Right.
So just to be clear, sailboats are not a watercraft.
Correct.
For this definition.
I don't want to make us go backwards, though, but can we talk about that again?
I think we should take out watercraft and call it,
Because a sailboat could very
Motorized.
well be a watercraft. And he has right of way on the water
So are kayaks.
when he's under sail.
So are kayaks.
So,
So are kayaks.
Yeah.
I think, so there's 2 elements to this, which is crowding on the lake, stuff floating around. The other thing that this relates to is when you can park at your dock. You have a 15-foot sailboat, that's a big boat, that's attached to your dock. Why is that different than a motor?
If the purpose is to limit the crowding on the lake,
2 different things.
well, I'm just saying, what I heard from the town meetings is that the purpose of this is overcrowding on the lake. And the methodology of dealing with the overcrowding is the limits that are reflected in this statute, in this proposed regulation. And my contention is kayaks, sailboats, paddle boards, anything that is not motorized are not the reason that we have overcrowding on the lake.
If we have overcrowding.
If we have
Overcrowding maybe
overcrowding,
Saturday and Sunday
yeah.
afternoon, but some
It's
people don't
not-
see that's such a bad
that's not established, that's opinion.
That's right, I totally agree. So I mean, I don't think we should be trying to fix something that's not broken either. So,
You know, again, we want people to enjoy that lake. At least that's my opinion.
So again, just clarify for me, how did we come out?
Motorized.
Oh, motorized. So sailboats, personal,
Watercraft is defined by, as any vehicle used in or on water as well as underwater, including boats, ships, hovercraft, and submarines, is a watercraft, also known as a water vessel or waterborne vessel. Watercraft usually has a propulsive capacity, whether by sail or paddle or engine, and hence it's distinct from a stationary device such as a pontoon or a float.
But what are you reading from?
Is that Merriam-Webster?
Wikipedia.
Oh, but
I mean, is the definition.
I'm reading the town code.
So then, by that definition, a kayak is a watercraft
Yeah.
because it's by paddle.
I'm sorry, look, I
People can
just,
pull them off.
you know,
So,
my comment stands. I believe it should be anything that's motorized, and subject to a traffic study proving differently,
Okay,
I
so
don't think there's-
are we in agreement?
I'm sorry, we had,
Why would you mention parking?
you gotta remember, sailboat has a motor.
It makes sense to me, though, what you're
And
saying.
we
I
also
love what
come
you're
in a
saying.
bigger
You're
size.
right.
What
Am I allowed to put now 5?
You have those little Hobie cats that people put up, according to Bob, you are, but how do
Yeah,
you
but,
just?
I'm not sure I
but we're
disagree.
talking practicality. People don't have 5 sailboats, and they're not riding 5 sailboats at once. They do have 4 or 5 kayaks, and they do go out, but they're going out at certain times of the day when it's not
Who
crowded.
read that definition? Was that, Joe, you
That
read
was
that definition?
Wikipedia. That was Wikipedia. We don't do law by
It's
Wikipedia.
exactly the same as what's in the code. I
But-
just read the-
But I
just
think
read
you
the
get,
code to me, it's the same.
when you start talking about sailboats, then it gets tricky, because some people that I've seen have these little, they're called Hobie cats.
Yeah, yeah.
Hobie
They're like
cats
8,
and
10 foot. So
and
you
sunfish.
literally carry them in and out, but it's got a sail and they go pretty fast.
But the problem is the word in the code is watercraft, correct?
But we're
Yes.
commenting on that
Defined in the
definition.
code as a boat, ship, or water vehicle, a boat, ship, or water vehicle driven by air, motor, or human power.
Yeah. And
So we need to either change the definition or make another definition
We-
of
we made-
motorized craft, and then say you can only have 2 motorized craft on your property, if
But we
that's what
made
you're
that
thinking.
recommendation about two meetings ago.
we need to change that, because quite frankly, the town supervisor's already changed it publicly several times for people saying we're gonna define it as motor. Not to say we can't go back and disagree with that, but that's what a lot of this uproar has been here, is about, what do you mean, I got 3 kayaks, or I got, paddle boards, and how can you count that as watercraft?
Well, if you go motorized, I mean, a sailboat, I'm not talking some little thing, is gonna have a motor on it anyway.
No, not on Lake Mapac.
But it's
they don't.
not it wouldn't be an attached motor, it'd be usually an outboard one that's like suspended over the side.
But if they have a motor, then they're caught by the definition. If they don't have a motor and they're,
Yeah, but as a lawyer, I can go, well, you can go in and argue and say it's not a motor attached to the boat, it's an accessory.
no,
you know,
if
take
it's
it off.
motorized.
So here, that needs some clarification, because now there's several motorized little kayaks out there with people fishing, little
They're not motorized. Well, some of them, they do put
Little
electric trolling
Trolling
engine.
motors on the back of a
Yeah,
canoe.
that's motorized. You put an
You know,
electric trolling motor on a.
one recommendation
What
I
if you
heard
look
was
at
anything that
Danby?
needs to be registered under New York
Motorized
state
scooters.
law.
Where do they stand? Where do the motorized scooters stand now, these days?
They don't require a
Do they,
license.
do they or do they not require registration and a license?
I was just making that point, that another way to skin the cat here would be refer to anything that's required to be registered under New York state law.
So do you know, Bob, offhand? Does a trolling
What?
motor need a registration?
I don't think so, but
Pardon?
The boat needs,
a
the boat
kayak,
needs a registration.
kayak
No,
does
not
not need a
kayak.
registration.
No, not a kayak, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I thought he was saying if you have like a John boat with a trolling motor on it.
Yes.
That's different.
that's,
Does a jet ski have to be registered?
Yes.
yes,
Kayak needs to be registered?
No.
no,
No.
nor does a,
Can we just back up?
nor
What is
does
the-
a
what's the-
sunfish
What's the goal
sailboat.
here, or the intent?
So as I said, I think there's 2. So the one is the crowding of the lake, right? So
Perceived crowds.
perceived crowding of the lake, and that's one side. But the other piece that relates to this is how many watercraft you can have at your dock.
But I
So
think
the key is the
the
definition of
latter
watercraft.
is a function of the former.
Which leads
The-
directly
the-
to
the-
it,
the-
correct.
But remember what we talked about just before we got to this, which was the width of lots and so
Mm.
forth. So
But you'll cover that anyway, but
How many watercrafts can you have at your
Yeah, so
dock?
Anthony's got concerns about this. I see you struggling with this.
Anthony, what is your concern?
It's not so much my concern, I'm not sure what the goal is here. What it is we're trying to establish. Okay, that's what I'm struggling
I
with.
think from the original definition,
We're trying to
it was
define.
really restricting everything and. Right. And Anthony's been a big advocate all along, I don't speak for, of, hey, people ought to get on the lake, people ought to have their fun. So I don't really want to limit paddleboards, kayaks, canoes, and in my opinion, sailboats.
So,
'cause-
Mr., let me be clear quick. So this provision is the dockage provision. So this is where it speaks to a waterfront structure shall not provide dockage for more than 2 watercraft. That's where the number shows up. This doesn't talk about traffic on the lake or intensity.
All right, so we're
But
trying
it's
to
in
identify
here,
watercraft
but it's
right now.
in here
Right.
because of the
That
perceived
presumably
traffic.
That's
Yeah.
what it links to.
We're talking about how many watercraft can be
Right,
at
we
the
want to
dock.
define watercraft so we know how many are allowed to be at the dock. Okay. And we've had conversation that anything motorized is a watercraft, correct?
No.
No?
Well, we
You
did,
would like to name it that, but right now,
What-
anything powered by motor, air, or human is a
Okay,
watercraft.
that, thanks for the clarification. So
Clearly,
now we
that's-
want to change that,
That's
is the
correct.
consensus.
Or add another one.
Or
That's
add
another
another
option.
one, or, okay, so I just wanted to break this down, I wanted to get a little
Yeah.
more granular with it.
So, to that point then, if someone's got a dock, I think it's, well, now you got people that have several jet skis at their dock and a boat. You got, you know.
That's a motorized
those are,
watercraft.
those are
Right, so you got 3 or
motorized.
4 children or whatever you have, you might have a pontoon boat and 2 or 3 kayak, 2 or 3 jet skis. There's people on it that have several jet skis and a boat.
But you're speaking to the numerical
Yeah, that's what-
limit as opposed to
at the
the
dock.
definition.
Yeah,
Yes.
we got to get the definition.
Let's talk
So
about
I don't
the
think, I don't
definition.
think we should limit a paddleboard or a kayak or anything of that nature.
Exempt from any regulation.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Correct.
So now we're back to define watercraft.
My opinion. So now we have to,
I would
now,
agree with that.
I'm sorry.
I agree with
We have to fine tune now what it is that we're limiting at the dock. And is that,
Well, is there any harm with changing our definition of what a vessel is and just
No,
saying
we should.
motorized?
No,
We
that's
should
what
do
Mike
that.
read.
But that's what we
That's
did 2 meetings ago.
Yeah, we changed
Oh, we
that.
got to reiterate that.
We changed
I
it.
understand that.
We changed it to motorcraft. We changed it to motorcraft a couple of meetings.
Right, but that-
Which is what the town's been
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
to the people.
Right, so now do we need to change that more because there might be a jet ski exception? Can you have only 2 watercraft, but up to 4 jet skis?
Well, it doesn't change the definition.
Personally, I think again, this is my view, the purpose of this is to limit traffic on the lake, perceived crowding. Whether it's a jet ski or a motorboat or a pontoon boat, I don't see any reason to distinguish between
So,
them.
but I got to be careful, I think we should be careful about that, because all the provisions that preceded this dealt with things like erosion and the width of docks and the width of lots, which relates to the number of boats you could park at the dock. Had nothing to do necessarily with the intensity of the use of those boats on the lake. The way it follows that conversation, to me, says I'm worried about these dock-related issues. If it had a preamble that talked about the intensity of the use of the lake, clearly that's what this meant. But the way it follows those provisions, I don't necessarily draw that conclusion plainly.
Well, maybe the question to the town is, what is the purpose of the regulation? Is the purpose to reduce traffic on the lake or some other
To
purpose?
ensure
If so, define what that is.
It's a good question. But it's not. That's not part of the preamble.
Pat, just to be clear, I'm going off, when, I observed every.
No, I'm
Hold
with
on,
you
I observed
100%.
every comment session, public comment session, and what I repeatedly heard from the town board was overcrowding on the lake.
Believe me, I'm
Okay.
with you 100% on that. I don't see this solving the problem necessarily. It seems
Well, it does, if you can't have your boat parked, you're not going to be able to use it.
exactly right. But again, define boat.
I get that, but I'm just saying, look, we can go round and round on
it's
this.
going to become a numerical order. A family who has the dock on the lake is allowed to have X amount of boats and X amount of wave runners and/or jet skis. That's what it's going to end up boiling down to. And so we have to define that.
Because,
And
Define
again,
what? Define
def-
what?
Now, to define it, how would depend, depending on the size of
numerical-
your dock versus John's dock or Mike's dock.
Well-
Mike's dock may be efficiently able to handle 6 watercrafts, where somebody else is maybe only able to handle two.
So if
Probably
you're so,
not,
just for
Anthony.
example, if you're so fortunate as to have 200 feet of frontage and you've got several docks, you can, I'm just
Or one
making the
dock,
number, I'm just making the number up.
Mm-hmm.
You can have 20, and I'm exaggerating just to make the point, you can have 20 watercraft, and I can only fit one dock, and I'm limited to something much less. I don't see that solving the overcrowding issue, which is why I think we need to have the town define why they are doing this.
Right, that
And if-
goes back to the traffic study on the.
Yes, goes
Is-
back to the traffic.
Is
If
there
that,
overcrowding?
if that's the reason, if the issue is overcrowding traffic on the lake, then that kind of tells us that this is not an intensity of use of the dock, it's
Right.
to limit the amount of access onto the water.
But have we even established that the lake is overcrowded?
No, that's my
No,
point.
we already
So, you know, we're going in circles is what
Yeah.
we're really doing.
Yeah.
It's true, now, it's true, that's exactly what we're doing. Now, me personally, I don't think the lake is overcrowded. It might be at different times of day, but on weekends possibly, for 3 months out of the year.
So we've asked Nelson Pope and Voorhees to do to bolster their narrative with further assessments, right? Sewer and water was an example. Like, you didn't do that calculation, so we don't know about our density issues. So this is a similar thing. There should be a traffic assessment of the traffic on the lake, and that should be the basis of making the judgments we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think, 'cause
So-
otherwise we go in circles.
Right, so again, the commentary is like some of the other things we ask the consultants to do, they ought to do this first. And once
Yeah.
we get that data, we can make a decision on numbers of boats or what is a boat and so forth, but we need that data first.
Pat, do you feel it's conventional research that they ought to be able to come up with in terms of traffic
So
studies?
unfortunately, they're not counting boats now. So it's the middle of.
No, what I'm saying is, we know how the highway department
Yeah, no, this
requires
is
a
an
traffic
unusual
study.
request. I bet.
Does
Nelson-
anything
I bet
exist?
They've never counted boats on a lake.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the case.
But not only counting boats, how do you determine traffic? I mean, time of day, all this stuff. Are there
I don't believe
standards?
I don't know that there's any standards
Yeah.
similar to our traffic standards.
Yeah,
that we
4th of
apply.
July weekend. Obviously, it's gonna be a heavier weekend, Memorial Day, 4th
Yeah.
of July, Labor
Yeah,
Day.
and one of the things that came up a lot through the meetings is, was concerns, or people were outspoken about, those who believe the lake is overcrowded, is, Pat Cleary has a dock on a lake, but he rents out 4 slips. And that's been a big complaint. And if you look at a lot of the properties, I'll pick on 6 Senate, but if you look at a lot of those small properties, there's several boats. And you've seen over the last couple of years, they start putting fingers in on them. I don't know if we've addressed that yet.
We haven't gotten there, but
So
we
I
talked,
think it
but
all
we talked
starts
about
from
that.
understanding the intensity of the use of the lake. If the lake is not intensively used, do we care that somebody rents his dock to another guy to put his boat there? If the lake is taxed and overburdened, we should prevent people from renting their docks to folks from out of town to come in and stick their boat there for a couple of months.
But how do we do that if, as we talked about before we took the break, there's no enforcement, and it's no real practical way to enforce that non-rental, that renting
Yeah, I mean,
prohibition?
Same thing as if I rent my driveway to
To
the
me-
Horse Head Provision truck.
To me, I gotta say, I don't think it's impractical to enforce the no renting limit. You have a compliance officer, you take out on the boat, you've got to give them, I'm not sure what the issue is in terms of looking up the registration and who owns that boat versus who owns the property, but it just seems, on a methodical basis, you can clear that out within a few weeks. And I just don't get that, but that's me.
Yeah, I mean, I hear Joe's commentary with respect to that. My opinion is, if we're going to impose rules and regulations, making them easy to enforce certainly is better than making them more complex to enforce. So I heard Joe saying it's complex to deal with the registration issue, as opposed to 2, I count 2, you're in violation per se.
And that's a judgment that the town can make.
Right.
But I don't think,
Talking about
but,
two different things, because you're talking about the spot issue of a neighbor complains about another neighbor, and then the police go out, or Mike goes out and investigates that. Or you're talking about a mass registration sweep that the Carmel PD conducts on July 1st. Again, I don't know that that's practical.
I think a registration sweep is the only effective way of enforcing that provision. And if you feel and the town feels that that's practically not doable, then my view would be don't adopt a rule that you can't really practically enforce in a meaningful way.
But are you suggesting, Bob, that you couldn't enforce the numerical limit?
No, you could, but I'm saying you don't need both.
Oh, I agree with that. Pick one or the other.
Yeah.
For sure.
Why don't you pick the easier one, which would be the numerical limit, and simplify it?
But one other point, you know, and this we heard at the, in the comment sessions in front of the town, that the number two, the numerical limit of number two is too tight
Right.
for
Agreed.
the community.
And they need to discuss the HOAs?
Well, we're going to get there.
No, I'm saying, but that was in addition
Yeah.
to what you're saying. I'm not saying
Yeah.
you're not there yet, I know.
And honestly, there's a policy decision here that is beyond our pay grade with respect to certain elements of this. Unless we have empirical data to make a recommendation to the town board, pick a number. It's 2, it's 3, how many people, how many boats do you deserve to own if you live in the town of Carmel? That's kind of a policy decision. So if we're gonna use a number, unless we have empirical data, it's the town board's call with respect to that. What I would say to them is, we need to be discreet with how we define this, so perhaps a typical motorized boat compared to a jet ski wave runner, define that differently compared to stuff you paddle.
There will be people who will say they would prefer seeing boats and fewer jet skis. So I think you're going to go down that rabbit hole.
I think
and
it's a
that's
big
why,
rabbit hole.
and that's,
That's
and
why I'm saying it's big.
yeah, and that's why I think it might be better to just take a generic, anything powered by a motor, and leave it at that, and chips fall where they fall.
Yeah, I'm also, you know, if we're jumping into the middle of this debate, the wave runner thing's a thing. I mean, you can buy 4 wave runners or 1 boat. People choose to buy 4 wave runners, there's no question about it, for the family. All
Some of
kids
the
get
wave
one.
runners have 3 people on them.
That's exactly right. So I think by sort of just saying, let's treat them the same, they're not the same. They're fundamentally different. They cost different, they operate differently, the maintenance costs are different.
But they crowd the lake in either the same or worse
Well, it's the
circumstances.
same. So I think someone in a boat probably operates a little differently than someone in a wave runner who's zipping around and rooster tailing people and,
But that's the point.
yeah, I agree.
So-
I'm with you 100%
Yeah.
on that. But so that's why I'm suggesting we should treat them differently. And whether you want to be more restrictive or less restrictive,
Well,
that's
maybe,
the policy.
maybe the recommendation to the town is consider whether they should be treated differently.
Yeah, I think.
But I personally am not prepared to say one or the other.
Totally fair.
Most of the, there's not in all here, but most of the wave runners and jet skis don't dock the way you dock a boat, right? They either go up on a lift, pull up onto a lift, or they go right up onto the shoreline, right? But I'm sure there's a few exceptions to that, but the wave runners are typically not docked sitting in the water. There might be a couple with whips on them that
Yeah.
do that, but most of them go right up into the shoreline on a skid, or go up in the air, come out of the water.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes a difference when we do this, but
That's not a mooring structure.
Yeah, I think it does make a difference. It's not, as Mike just said, it's not a mooring structure,
yeah.
it's not a dock.
Yeah. So maybe that helps us in our,
Actually, that's an interesting aspect of it, because that relates sort of to kayaks and canoes, where you don't need a dock necessarily, you just drag it up on the shore. So maybe that's something to consider.
Well,
If
I
your
have-
If your thing is dragged up on the shore.
I
it doesn't
have,
fall
I
under
have,
the narrow-
I have 4 kayaks on the dock, on a rack on the dock. A lot of people have racks.
but out of the water, they're on a.
Yeah.
Talk about a rabbit hole, huh? It's an interesting conversation. I don't know that there's a right answer here. But again, what I'm defaulting to, I need some data to make some of these judgments. So having said that, the problem with, we're not getting data for 6 months.
So I have a lot of comments, on section H.
So if we were to just say, just to move this along, I'll put it out there and we'll think about it. If we were just to say docking, because we run a number at the docks, right? How many watercraft being defined as motor vehicle, motor craft, excluding jet skis, wave runners at the docks. So you're allowed to have, I'm picking a number, 2 watercraft at your dock, excluding wave runner jet skis.
I'd rather wait to see what the traffic study says
All right,
and
so that's
say,
6 months.
who, I understand, but say who's causing and what's causing the
We
traffic.
can do that, I was just trying to,
Because there will be a number of people who really are not happy with the number of jet skis on the lake.
I agree with that, but so play this out. So I think the jet skis are the most annoying thing on the lake personally. But no matter if we define the lake as crowded or not crowded, we're still going to have to go back to the answer of how many docks, how many boats, how many watercraft at a dock. So I'm not sure if it comes back the lake's crowded, okay. If it comes back the lake's not crowded, okay. Does it change how many watercraft are at the dock?
Well,
Do you care? Who cares?
I mean, in theory, if you came to a conclusion that you wanted to limit the number of powered boats, whether they're at a dock or whether they're brought up on the shoreline, such as a jet ski, you could define your numerical limit so it covers not only what's at the dock, but what's also on the shoreline. And again, so this all comes back to the traffic study that you're talking about.
But again, do we care, is the lake crowded because of people paddling on their kayaks?
No, I'm talking about, let's assume that we've crossed the bridge of defining watercraft
Gotcha.
as power boats.
Got it.
Once you define it as power boats and you've gone through a traffic study and you know what you're trying to limit, you do not, and you need to, if you conclude that you need to have a numerical limit, that numerical limit can be applied to an actual dock or
yeah.
use of the shoreline. It's up to the town.
Yeah, I still think we need an answer on number of watercraft at a dock. Right, that's what this whole thing's, a lot of this is about.
What if you went
We're
down
not
the road
nec-
saying number of watercrafts per household? Take the dock out of it.
So, one of the discussion, I'm sorry, Pat, but
That
one
would
of,
eliminate a lot of things.
one of the uproars from people is, you don't tell me how many cars I
Yeah.
have in my driveway. You're gonna tell me how many boats I can have in my
Yeah,
backyard?
The dock limitation.
I know,
still doing it.
I know.
Well, it is, but the dock limitation, to me, at least, there's some justification because it relates to the width of the dock and your relationship to the property. I can make some argument that it has some bearing on your property. The limit on your numbers, just as Craig says, who do you say how many boats I can have arbitrarily, how many cars I can have? That's a little more problematic because there's not a link to something. It's just a number. You just came up with a number. I collect boats, that's right.
Yeah.
No, seriously, somebody could.
I mean, I can't see us, traffic study or not, I don't know how the traffic study is gonna impact how many watercraft we allow at a dock.
Well, what is it, if the traffic study says there's no overcrowding, then why are we limiting the number of watercrafts
So,
at the dock? It seems, to again, we're
Right,
going in,
that's
we're
the whole
going,
point.
we're going in circles, but I think all the limits that we're talking about in this section all come from a perceived, yet unproven, perceived notion that the lake is overcrowded. If the traffic study bears that out, then you know you've got several different ways you can limit things. You can do it at the dock, you can do it at the shore, you can do it by renting. You have a number of options to choose. Some are better than others. We've heard that the rental thing is practically unenforceable, so that tells me something. So you come back to the numerical, and if you have convinced yourself that there is an overcrowding issue, then you want to limit the number of boats on the water. And the way you limit the number of boats on the water is you limit the access to the water. That access comes from the dock, the access comes from the shoreline. Again, assuming we're talking
So,
about power
Bob,
boats.
can I just ask a question? How many people trailer their boats on that Sunday afternoon?
You'd have to talk to the marinas, but that's where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I think one marina does not do any, public boat launch. The other one does, and I know from talking to the owner that on particularly crowded days, he shuts down, he makes his own personal judgment.
Really?
I'll shut down at 2 o'clock.
That's
That's just
interesting.
too many.
Well, in the morning, they have a lot of fishing contests. Kim, you going to say something?
I was going to say, how are the marinas regulated? Because you don't want to penalize our residents who have moved here, who live here on the lake to enjoy the lake that they've been paying taxes for. And there needs to be maybe some regulation and some accountability on the marinas who are allowing more traffic onto the lake. Now, I know that we also don't want to limit, or we don't want to penalize the traffic that we want to come into town and have people shop, because people do come here for the lakes. But there has to be some kind of a balance where we hold the marinas accountable for some type of
Yeah,
a
Kim,
regulation.
and so my point to that issue is, if your assumption is the number of boats you can put at your dock relates to the intensity of the use of the lake, but the marinas also influence that, and how many people privately trailer their boats to the lake and don't dock at all, then the docks don't relate to the intensity of the use of the lake. They contribute to that, but there are other things that contribute to it as well. So I think that's, again, where I kind of started with this, was, is the dock the density issue, or is the dock some other issue? And I'm
'Cause
not
you
sure
also
I know
have-
the answer to that.
You also have Mayapack residents that don't live on the lake who have boats.
Yeah,
So, but then you also have out-of-towners that come.
right.
So there should be some kind of regulation somehow.
Oh, no doubt, there's no question about that. I think we're just wrestling with this very difficult issue on how to do it, and what's the mark that we seize upon to use as the metric to regulate around. I don't know.
So the traffic study comes back and says, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday mornings, very minimal traffic. Friday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, between Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's crowded. What's that going to change? I know it's good information to have, but I think we know what the traffic study is going to say based on living here.
Yeah, so, good point.
So you have an odd number address, you can come out on Monday, Wednesday for now.
Right, well, yeah, that's what
You know?
we're getting to. So is it a situation where it's certain periods of the year where you must regulate something? That doesn't relate to a number of boats on a dock. That relates to something else.
I think at some point, depending upon the type of regulation you might want to adopt, you cross into whether the town has the authority to put those limits into place. And the example is, I think in years past, the town attempted to put in a registration requirement with a sticker. You needed, to limit, sort of like the Metro North parking lot.
Right, a
In the
resident
sense
sticker.
that you had a limited number of spaces, you had to apply for a permit, and that's how you got on the lake. And apparently, under the navigation law, the town was found not to have authority to do that. So there are ways to address that, too. You can go to the state legislature and make an application, but, in several years, maybe something happens. So I think you have to work within the practical limits of what you
What we
have.
can do.
Yeah.
Going back to the issue of overcrowding, I wonder if there's any data that's been looked at to whether there are accidents on the lake or injuries or boats bumping into each other.
Well, they said well, the PD, I think at one of the public sessions, it was announced that there were 11 violations issued
That's all.
and no accidents.
That's that's negligible.
Yeah.
So that would go against the concept that it's overcrowded. Yeah. I mean, putting aside the noise issue, that's separate, but the overcrowding,
I mean, there might be, how much fuel the marinas pump at a particular point in time may be a metric that's useful. I don't know. I don't really know how to measure this. I've never encountered it before. I don't know how you do it.
But if you trailer your boat, you're gonna go to the gas station and get gas if you
Yeah.
can, because you pay half, so.
And, hey, Joe, we couldn't say the lakes in town of Carmel are only for town of Carmel or Putnam County residents only, right? Because I think, that's right, that's what we just said, because it's a state lake.
That's what, we were talking before about, Bob had mentioned permitting and stickering on our lake.
How much authority does the Greenway Pact give us?
No, not really. A lot. It gives us full authority to pass our own zoning ordinance that are not inconsistent with the state navigation laws.
So it really doesn't extend out to the water?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it.
So
again.
for
I think
example-
it was up to 1,500, it was
So
0 to
one of the
1,500.
one of the complaints we heard at the town meetings, that if you want to talk about overcrowding, one of the issues that ought to be looked at is the concept of rafting, where they tie up 10, 15 boats at once, and, one could argue, it's a hazard or whatever. Would the navigation law, the Greenway Pact allow the town to adopt a regulation about that?
Yeah, I think it might.
So limitation on how many boats could be.
Tied together?
Moored together, or, yeah, I think it might.
Yeah, again, guys, I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't know how to measure it. I don't know how to put it in perspective. There's a lot of it that would be policy decisions that are not yours. And I don't know that it's your problem to solve necessarily. So the one thing that I will say, though, is I haven't delved into this. I don't know if Joe has. But maybe there's case law, maybe there's information, maybe there are regulations that exist elsewhere that we could perhaps look at. And I'm happy to do a little bit of research to find out if that is the case.
Well, before you do, didn't the Lake Advisory Committee hire an attorney to do a study with respect to this?
I'm on the Lake Advisory Committee. The town board approved it. This was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And at the most recent executive session, I asked the question of our chairman whether any reports or memos or research had been rendered, and the answer was no.
Was it because the work hadn't been done, or that
I
they
don't,
hadn't gotten around to writing?
I'm
it
not,
down?
I don't know the
Because if
facts.
somebody's been doing research, that would be really, really useful to get our hands on.
If it exists, it hasn't been shared with the Lake Park District Board.
So again, Cook, I don't know how to put a bow on this particular issue. I don't think we can. Yeah. So
And,
again, I'm happy to do some
I'm
research to
for
see
it.
if I can
I'm
find it.
okay with doing a traffic study. I just don't think it answers our questions, Cruz.
Probably not. And I don't know.
It'll
that you-
say,
how do
the
you
traffic
do
study's
it?
gonna say it's busy on Saturday afternoons and Sunday afternoons. That's what it's gonna say.
Probably right. And the second part of it is you can't do it for
And then-
6 months.
right.
So we're
But
going to
let's,
stop
let's
everything.
let's also not lose focus of what the planning board is doing now. We're not taking over the writing of this document.
Good point.
You may have commissioned a traffic study and as part of your analysis if it was your responsibility to write this document. It's not. So all we can do is go back and say in our report to the town board, we do believe that there is value in a boat traffic study for the future, and the ordinances should be viewed with an eye towards that. That would be a sound recommendation. The idea that we've got to wait till the town board does a traffic study on the lake before we comment, we don't have the time.
I agree. That's,
You should have said that about 6 o'clock tonight.
Thank you. It didn't make its way down here.
all right, pal, let's just go to the next. I mean, we'll come back. 'cause-
I think I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
The next one is the issue we've dealt with now a couple of times. Your waterfront structure can't be closer than 15 feet to your neighbors.
Oh,
Yeah, they're all closer than 15 feet to their neighbors mostly, so that's an issue.
So do we even need that in there? No, what?
Are they talking about the dock?
Yeah, again, a waterfront structure is a dock, it's everybody's everywhere.
Well,
Some of the lots aren't 30 feet wide.
Yeah.
right, that's been a big issue. So couldn't we say the waterfront structure should be centered on your property, or, that's not good for all, but,
The problem is, again, this issue of pre-existing and what happens if you have to replace it and come back,
yeah.
you know.
On 6N, it's okay to say
Well,
centered, but
some
not
of
a lot of
these,
houses.
some of these waterfront docks have cement piers, and, you know, if you're taken out by an iceberg, and you've got to just put a wood platform back on, and it's more than 50%, you wouldn't, under the way this is drafted now, you wouldn't be able to, and now, if it was on one side or the other, you'd have a problem.
Do we even need this in there, number 10 in there?
Well, let me play devil's advocate. Mike, so thinking about 6N with the parcels we have there, I mean, is there anything preventing, let's say you have a 20-foot wide parcel. Is there anything preventing that guy from subdividing that and selling 10-foot strip to somebody and him keeping 10-foot strip just for lake access?
Yeah,
120,000 square foot lot.
yeah, he needs 3 acres.
It's a subdivision, right?
Yeah. And our zoning is, you need 3 acres.
So, okay,
These are woefully non-conforming lots, or
well, yeah,
non-conforming in the old zone.
okay. No, my only thought was, I mean, if some ingenious guy did something like that, then maybe you would want to keep this. But if we can't do that, then to Craig's point, what's the point?
Do we need number 10?
The problem is, right now, the way the code's written is if you have a waterfront lot without a house on it, it doesn't have to be 120,000 square feet, so.
It's a pre-existing non-conforming lot.
No, the code allows, hold on, let me read it.
Because you're going to have people that are going to encroach.
50 feet wide, 3,000 square foot minimum lot area
For a waterfront.
for a waterfront.
Right.
But it's in the R120 zone, so to divide it, you would have to have
Right.
the 120,000 square feet. But if you don't have the 120, you have 3, you're allowed to use it.
Right,
You use it, but not subdivide it.
That's correct, agree.
Yeah.
I think number 10
That's what I'm trying to say, I don't want it to be
residence,
confusing. You're
just
still
like
in
a
the
shed, you don't want to put
120,000
too close to
square
your
foot
neighbor's
zone.
property.
Yep.
But if you
But
have
what
the
do you do
lot
with
that's
6N
only
when the property
3,100
is
square feet, you
30
can
feet
do
wide?
that.
So per Craig's comment on number 10, what would be the issue if that were deleted?
Set regulations.
You know, I think the intent of it,
I just want to
in a
hear,
residence, I'm sorry,
I'd ask, if we deleted number 10, what would be the problem?
and that's where I was
what I'm
saying, in a residence, I can understand doing that. It's almost like, look, don't, you know, it's almost like a shed. You want it strategically placed. But we also talk about sheds, we say in Lake Secor, Mike will tell you, you can't enforce that because it's small property. So if 6N equals Lake Secor here with docks, how do you can't do it. So we can't have, you can in this part, but you can't in that part.
Plus, there are pre-existing
Yeah.
docks
I'm
all
okay.
around the lake that are not in conformity with this now.
I think we
The way
can
it's
take it,
written right now is if you have a building, meaning a boathouse or a bathhouse, then it has to have a 15-foot side yard. That's the way the current code reads,
Okay, but,
which makes
okay,
sense.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Except for the
That
dock, it
makes
does
sense.
not.
I'm with you, Mike. I'm with
so
with
should
you.
our recommendation be delete this?
Or
Or,
clarify
or,
it to
or
be,
or go back to the original?
right,
What's wrong with our existing code?
Go back to the original
yeah,
code.
boathouses and
Yeah.
baths.
So instead of waterfront, it says boathouses and bathhouses? Is that what you,
Boathouse and bathhouse is what we have now.
that's what, I think that makes more sense.
Yep.
Boathouse and
Bathhouse
bathhouse,
shall not extend.
Because that would also block
15
use.
feet from any property line, so yes, that's what it says now, boathouse and bathhouse.
And that makes sense, because that would block people's
Yep.
view, that would, you know,
Yeah.
You cube off your whole lot if you have a 30-foot wide lot.
yeah. All right, good, we got one done. Let's go on to the next one.
It's good negotiating with yourself.
The next one is buffer strips, and this is buffer strips of what's going on, Mike, from the lake. So
What's
this
a
is
buffer strip?
landscaping. So this is basically saying you need 20 feet on the water side of anything you build on your waterfront lot to screen your boathouse or bathhouse from the people out enjoying the lake.
And we don't currently do that, right?
Could you?
Screen, yeah.
How do you get the algae to grow up in front of your boat?
So, and plus, if you have waterfront property, you have waterfront property to have waterfront property, not to
Exactly.
have a
Not to
bunch
look
of
at bushes.
landscaping in the way.
Yeah.
Take this out too?
So 11 can go?
Yep,
I would suggest that this is an inconsistent provision.
okay.
12,
I mean, if you had a 100-foot wide property, that wouldn't be a problem.
but even still, I would want my whole waterfront property
No, I'm saying, but if
free
you
and
had
clear.
100 feet, and you want to keep a little buffer, so, you know, except for your access point, it wouldn't be terrible.
Yeah, but just think, most people want to have the view of the lake. They don't want stuff in the way.
We moved on that.
12 is waterfront structures
away my
can't
projects.
interfere with navigation. So this is the issue Mike raised earlier with, we don't get into navigation and the waterways that are governed by the DEC.
The issue I see in this is in the third and fourth line, the reference to that they have to be appropriately lit to provide adequate warning to boaters. We've been trying to reduce
Right.
lighting on the lake rather than increasing.
Inconsistent.
Yeah. And most docks don't have electricity right now.
Yep, that's another good point. Underwater portions of docks and piles shall be composed of materials that are chemically inert, that's fine.
I think there's some good parts to that.
Configuration of waterfront structure determined on a case-by-case basis, considering the location and limiting natural features of sites demonstrating need of compliance with state laws and regulations. So basically, it says, we don't really have regulations, it's case-by-case basis, but here's our regulations, saying we don't have regulations, it's a case-by-case basis.
Well, if you go back to the first sentence, I like what it says, but do not produce glare. So, and we talked about that earlier, lighting's okay as long as it's proper downward
But do-
lighting, it doesn't
But do
produce
we want
glare.
to require lighting?
No,
But that's what this does.
I don't think we want to require it.
Yeah.
So are we saying take out the first sentence?
Yeah, again, so this is two different issues that are contradictory. So it is, there's dock, and we don't want you to drive your boat into the dock. So put a light on it. We're also saying lighting on the waterfront is bad because it creates glare and it's a visual impact. So two inherent contradictory provisions are embedded in one zoning provision.
But if we go back to where it said lighting earlier, if we write that properly, downward lighting, a certain amount of,
The way I would have written this, Mr. Chairman, would have been to, the dock should be designed so that it doesn't interfere with navigation, whether that's a light or a flag or a spinner or whatever, that's all I would say.
Let's
with
do that.
respect to
Yeah, because the way it is now, everybody would then be required to have electricity run down to the
Right,
dock.
right.
Which isn't a good thing with water.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Coming from the building inspector, it sounds really good.
Guys are having way too much fun.
Oh, we're getting tired, we're punchy.
13, I'm way past that, right. With 13, the Rich or Mike may require stormwater control to be installed, duh. 14, all portable toilets visible from the waterfront shall be screened from view by the use of lattice screening, year-round vegetation screening, or similar design. This may be a really overstepping thing, so I get it, you don't want to see people doing their business while you're out boating on the lake, I get that. Is that really a significant issue? I think it's an issue when you're on your boat. People tend to do that off the side of the boat.
I think the issue we've always heard about is driving down 6N and all you see is signs for gotta go. I hadn't heard that this was an issue in terms of if you're on the lake and looking onto
Yeah,
the
it
shore.
seems surprising to me,
Yeah.
but yeah, Porta Johns and gotta go.
Yeah, I mean, it is unsightly, but also, we gotta be sensitive what kind of screening. We also don't want 8-foot-high hedges, and we don't want the growth to get out of control that would blocking the pristine lake and people's view of the lake.
Yeah.
It's
and-
kind of funny, because our code kind of says don't put up a fence over 4 feet tall,
Right.
but then it says put up a screen around your porta potty.
Right, and they're all gonna be at least.
8 feet.
Yeah.
6 or 8, at least 7 feet tall.
It's got to be, right? They're 7 feet tall, the porta potty. I mean, I understand you want to screen them, but with
But
what?
I think the screening can get, yeah, so if you have lattice, now you got an 8-foot-high 7-foot to 8-foot-high lattice.
Which is a fence.
If you have a hedge, well, that's, you can't see, that isn't so great either. That's not gonna look so good.
Plus, the porta, I mean, you have to access them. The guy comes twice a month or whatever.
Yeah.
How, what is he, disassemble the fence?
Maybe designate the color. They should be a forest
So-
green or.
Yeah.
We have no sewer, we have no water serving these lots.
Health
This is a-
Department wants these.
This is a reality, they have to exist. Is there a way to somehow require better porta-johns in the town of Carmel? I don't know that you can do that. If I were a porta-john company, I would jump all over that and say, hey, here's the really nice porta-john, buy mine. And he would corner the market because he's got a green one that looks nice and it looks like a little.
Camel pattern on it.
Right,
I
right.
would say I would say it has to be camouflaged, like Anthony said. Color matters.
Camouflage
I mean-
or no advertising, so. it
Right,
can't-
no advertising.
The name can't be blaring all over it. I think that's probably okay, but we want them. That's the way, I'd rather that than having somebody,
An earth tone color, no advertising.
Right.
I like that.
So if I'm hearing you correct, 14 is out.
So 14, I would modify to be, the facility needs to be properly designed. We can think of language, instead of saying fencing and lattice and landscaping, the architecture of it or the color of it,
No ads.
no advertising.
Well, are we, again, going back to what we were talking about before, addressing a problem that we don't have? I mean, is that an issue right now?
Haven't heard it.
We do get several complaints a year on that.
From the water?
From the
as
lakeside?
opposed- From the lakeside
No,
or?
no,
That's
from the
my
roadside.
point. Roadside.
I would say
but
from the
not
roadside
This
is
is
more.
lakeside.
Yeah, I
I
get
know.
it, the lakeside doesn't make sense.
All portable,
Are we sure that's not a typo?
Says all
Visible from
toilets
the
visible from the waterfront.
Yeah, I
So
would
if you
take that
don't,
out.
so then just float down a little bit further and don't look at the porta sand. Don't camp outside the porta sand. Don't dock outside the porta sand.
I mean, who's
Visible
really
from the
driving
waterfront,
by
though. They're talking about
looking
at the lakes,
at porta
right?
potties?
Or from, they're not saying
Takes a
from the
certain
lake,
type of individual.
they're saying from the waterfront.
from the lake.
Yeah, this is, what kind of complaints do you get?
Our complaints are from the road.
Right, but what do
Right.
they say?
Why do we have to see blue toilet after blue toilet after blue toilet on the lake? So I think there's a section in there now that says it has to be screened, so we just tell the people, put something up, dress it up a little.
I mean, it's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
I mean, no one wants to look at porta sands, but what do you, like you said, we don't want 8-foot-high lattice either. And there's small properties.
I think the advertising is a big deal.
Yeah, and the color.
Because the color and the advertising will do a lot.
I think so.
That's kind of an architectural review thing. It's all about aesthetics.
I think that's what we go with.
A form-based code.
So I would either insert the language Kim is suggesting in 14 or take 14 out and let the architectural board, well, the architectural board wouldn't deal with this. It's a temporary structure. It doesn't get a permit from the architectural board, so they'd never have.
God.
So you, as the architectural board, never have an opportunity to deal with this.
I would just deal with this in terms of design and signage and.
No advertising.
and-
No
yeah.
I like the way
advertising.
Kim
No
just-
advertising visible, yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
No advertising is a big deal.
Agreed.
An earth tone, earth tone
Right,
color.
yeah.
and
I mean-
advertising.
Green, not
They're generally like green, brown, right?
which is fine.
No light greens, no light blues.
No pinks.
No blues, no oranges,
pink.
earth
No
tone.
pink.
Woodland
Neutral
primaries
earth
accepted.
tone.
Always in my book.
Can we get that in there, Pat?
What's that?
Neutral earth tone.
Yeah, I wrote that down,
Okay.
so I think that's a good idea.
What about a ghee soup for a porta potty? How about a ghillie suit for a porta potty? Like, full, just wrapped around.
Snipe,
I'm good with it, like Wrigley Field.
snipe,
That's it.
a sniper
That's
set.
how I think, sir.
We are getting a little punch hungry here.
I'm just thinking outside the box.
No pun intended.
You saw it.
All right, Pat, stay with us.
It's like putting a dress on it.
Pat, I'm just warming up.
68.
Ownership.
All right.
Bob, you said you had comments on that.
Yes, so first,
He's got a lot.
my comments assume that this section survives. It may not, but if it doesn't. In H1, the reference to owner occupant is vague wording in the existing code. It refers to owner or lessee or the immediate family, owner, lessee, immediate family, or bona fide guest. So what is an occupant?
Should we just use the
This
same
is
language?
This is a dock.
Somebody lives on the dock.
I would revert back to the.
Use the same language?
Yeah.
What was it, Bob? Owner,
It's in the code.
Owner or lessee and the immediate family or bona fide guests of such owner or lessee. But the question of lessee brings up the issue, should be a lessee of the lot,
property.
of the lot, parcel, whatever the word is,
Yeah.
as opposed to, and
The dock.
And then that brings up the question, can somebody do an undivided lease to 5 different people, thereby circumventing this and letting them use the, so I think the recommendation is to think carefully about this wording and to get more precise.
Okay?
This is going to go, my comments on this go back to what Joe said before about enforcement. Right? So, a waterfront structure shall be limited to use by watercraft of the property owner and shall not be used to store watercraft owned, used, rented, or leased by persons that are not residents of lots. So, that says my cousin couldn't store
Right.
their boat, or, you know. It goes back to, you know, I understand why it's there, but
Won't be enforced.
enforcement.
I think they intend this to be for a house with a lot, not a lot with the dock. Okay,
Doesn't
so,
say that.
so if I go and I rent your house for the summer from you,
Yep.
I am the tenant, I can use your dock. I think that's the intent.
And that's fine.
But that's not how it's written, and I
Right.
see you guys are putting a good twist on it, which is
Yeah.
what we're supposed to do.
I think
and
what you
that's
said
Mike
sounds
makes a good
better.
point.
Yeah.
It really, there's almost 2 sets of rules. It's-
Two sets of rules depending on if it's a
home,
dock lot
lake,
or
or
a
a dock.
residence with a dock, agreed.
Can I ask a question? Why should that be a distinction?
Because if I have a lot with a dock on Westlake Boulevard, just say, and I rent to Joe and to you and to Pat and to John, you're all tenants, if I rent it to all of you, correct?
What's the dock or the property?
Dock or the property.
The property. Why can't I rent it to 4 people?
That's the question I asked.
No, great, and I'm agreeing with you, and that's why I'm
But
saying.
what does it matter?
Because if I have a house
So
with
what?
a dock and I rent it to you, truly, the house, you should be able to use my dock.
I understand, but but the other side of it is, you could have a house, I could have a house,
Rent it to 4 people.
and I could rent, and I have a backyard,
Would they each be entitled to bring their own?
and I can rent, sign a lease that says, each of these 5 people can, so I don't think it
So-
makes
so
a
I
difference
think
whether
the
a house
answer-
is on it or not.
I think the answer is the definition of a family. So you can't turn a single-family home into a hotel. You can't rent out to 35 different people in different rooms. As long as it's a single-family home, it could be rented by up to 5 unrelated people. That's the limit. That's the family definition of a single-family home. Once you go beyond that, it's a bed and breakfast, or it's a B&B, or it's something other than a single-family home. So you're bound by the family definition that Mike.
But Bob's not saying a family, Bob's saying if he rents space on his land to you, I think. I don't mean
I'm
to put words in your mouth.
I'm leasing access to my land. The
5
house,
unrelated people.
I'm going to stay in the house.
Yep.
I'm going to lease access to my land to any number of people.
Oh, and they're not gonna live there.
They're not going to live there.
And it doesn't say
Each
that.
of them could potentially bring their own watercraft.
And they can, and they're lessees. That's what I'm saying. The definition needs to be
Lessee, yeah, that's a good-
thought
And then we
through.
gotta make sure we cover in here, there's several homes on East Lake Boulevard that are 4 and 6 family homes that have docks for 4 or 6 families. So you might rent an apartment there and it comes with a boat slip. Several of those houses, what's that, Mike?
Whitesell, that's like 40,
Right, yeah, right.
for example.
Right, but, yeah. So, and if you're renting, if you're part of a multifamily house that has 6 docks, and the law of you paying $2,000-3,000 a month is I'm gonna get a dock slip with that. Yeah, okay, I'm in, because it's gonna cost me $3,000 to rent a dock slip somewhere else, so, okay, I'll figure that into my rent. And it's legal, it's legit, I don't think that should affect this.
And the restaurants too, you think about the restaurants.
Right.
Well, does number 2 address that? Which is no waterfront structure or accessory to a residence shall be used, rented, or offered for a fee on or a one-time continuing basis for the storage and mooring of watercraft.
It is, but it's contradictory to one if I rent
That's what I'm
used
saying.
space.
I may not be renting it, but I may not be renting the structure, but I'm
Used.
providing access by virtue of
used.
your rental of my backyard.
Yeah, it says used, rented, or offered, so.
All right, so let's just go back to one and finish that. That might read okay, because it's saying, a waterfront structure shall be limited to use by watercraft, the property owner or occupant. So if I'm part of a 6-family house or 4-family house, I'm the occupant.
Yeah, but we have, but that occupancy is referring to the owner occupant in number 1. That definition needs to be cleared up.
Well, let's clear up and say, renter, leasee, whatever the case is, but if you're renting an apartment in a multifamily house and it comes with a dock, that's okay. Because many of the houses are built that way.
Yeah.
So we just gotta make sure that reads as such, because it says owner occupant, does it say leasee also, or renter, or?
But next year, a nice sheet, whatever they call a sheet, comes in and takes out the dock. Are they only allowed to rebuild 2 of the docks?
Yeah, that's the whole.
Well, that would come back to us, that would come to us.
But if it says that they can only build 2, they would need to go to zoning for a variance to build back to 6.
Well, it goes back to what we brought up earlier with the 60-foot dock. It gets grandfathered in, but as soon as the ice takes out, it's that it come back to us and we get to review it. Why do you need that? And you need it because you only have, 6 inches of water at 40 feet.
I think one could stay as is.
Just as long as it includes renter or leasing.
Owner,
Well, it
leasee,
says it.
renter.
Keep reading. Should not be used to store, owned, used, rented, or leased by persons that are not residents of the lot.
So what, so then, I don't
But they
really
are
see an issue with that. I'm trying to look at the application, I'm trying to look at that there's multifamily houses on the lake that do that today, and,
I just think the definition needs to be cleared up.
all right, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
So clarify, but okay, right?
For number
And
1.
make sure,
For one.
and make sure it works for rental properties that, multifamily, that type of thing.
Clarify to include multifamily.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to 2.
So for 2, I think we should just take out the residential use, because leaving that in excludes all the boat slips on the 6N side
Right.
where there's no residential use. And it would have the same teeth if you just, in no waterfront structure shall be used, rented, or for a fee.
East Lake too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Whether it's a residence or not, it will be.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, again, it's enforcement, but, there's plenty of people that do that.
So we would take out to a residential use.
Yeah.
Joe, you're gonna be busy going around that little boat on weekends. jumping. Put your sunscreen on, Joe. Just
Show
residential.
you the good fishing spots.
Accessory to residential.
Next one's the HOA issue.
All right, HOAs. I'll have more when we get to the grandfathering provision about HOAs, but just parsing the words. In the second line, which proposes a waterfront structure, I'm focused on the next phrase, or access through the regulated area. Now, all of a sudden, we're beyond waterfront structures, and we're talking about access through, this is that 50 feet from the water line. Why are we worried about access through the regulated area if we're focused on waterfront structures?
It's a good question. We did have that one project where there was a long driveway. Where was that? And it went through I think,
Is that the Long Beach School?
I don't remember, it's triggering something.
And it comes up in the next sentence. It says, use of land shall be only by the individuals. I think we should just confine this to the waterfront structure. By this definition, if I had an HOA without a dock and I wanted to allow kayak use under an amended definition
You
of-
couldn't bring your kayak
I
to the
couldn't bring
water.
my kayak to the water.
Yeah.
So I think this is overly broad.
I think it's good when we do this, if we look for the application and try to, see, like, all right, I
Practically
live at
has
White
it.
Sail. Well, what do you mean I can't have a kayak? Or the multifamily houses on 6th Center. I think it's good when we look at real-life scenarios here. So Bob, you're saying take out what?
I'm saying pare back the wording in number 3. In several areas, and in the very last line, it's the same issue, talking about lands. I think we should be talking about the waterfront structure and not access through lands.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. To me, this is what this is more about than lands.
Well, as we said, if you, under this definition, if you had no dock, you wouldn't be able to put kayaks in the water.
That would,
And that's contradictory to what everybody's doing in White Swan right now, is everyone's carrying their kayaks in there, which is good. Yeah, goes back to your point, they should be able to put their kayaks in the water.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yep.
It's a good point. Restaurants is the next one. Waterfront structures are allowed to accessory to a restaurant which maintains frontage only, where said structures are used as an alternative to landside parking.
So that would be the restaurant, what's the name of that one?
The old Cunningham's?
Yeah, where you can pull up in the boat and park.
And the other one, too.
Cobo?
What needs to be
Blue.
called?
Well, blue is the second half of it, because blue is talking about where they have, they lease out for seasonal.
Yeah, I think they have both there, right? They have a few slots for people to drive over and eat, and a few for rent.
I think my impression was that they were all rental, but I could be wrong.
There is a, where you actually put the boat in the water there, during the season, you can tie up. I think it's 1 or 2 slips, Mike. It's really the on and off ramp that gets you in there. But during the season, you can pull your boat up there and go into dinner.
And is there a restaurant on the property?
Oh, yeah.
So this is saying you can't do that. If
Well,
that's
you
the-
can do it if you regulate it as
if
a
you- You
marina.
become a marina.
So
at
what does that
point.
mean, though?
So I wonder, because is a restaurant permissible in a marina?
That one, the one we're talking about has a use, variance from the zoning board
For the slips.
for the slips and the restaurant, to have both.
Right.
But again, you're saying it has to go by a marina. What does that mean?
To the restaurant? I don't know.
What happens if somebody wanted to open up a restaurant in the existing marina?
Or worse, does a
They need a use
marina,
variance like he got.
Right.
so for example, a restaurant has certain requirements for like grease traps or things like that. A marina probably doesn't.
Right.
So now I'm a marina, I don't have to comply with the Ansel hood on my kitchen or whatever it might be. Even though it's a restaurant that operates just like a restaurant.
I don't know if we have 3 restaurants at Waterfront, right? Kobu, the old Cunningham's, and it's called Lake House now, I think. Why would we regulate them as a marina? They're not a marina, although they have boat slips.
Yeah, but,
Kobu does?
but,
Kobu doesn't.
but Pat, I don't know that I agree, because I think by the wording in here, it's saying the waterfront structure is regulated as a marina. It's not saying the whole thing.
He
Correct.
doesn't follow
I
the rules
agree.
well.
So, you know, the grease trap,
You're right, I missed the beginning.
And he still
Waterfront
needs it.
Structures,
yeah, so the docks would be a marina, and it would be regulated as a marina. And then it goes back to the question, what does that mean?
good catch, Counselor, I see that now.
So what were you saying with the deemed a marina? Take that out?
No, this stays put. It's saying waterfront structures. So if you built a dock and a boathouse on your restaurant, that gets regulated as the marina. The restaurant stays.
Yeah, not the whole property.
Yeah, okay.
Number 5, again, working on the terminology, the name of the owner of the property would govern, and I think, so here's some examples. The house is registered in the name of the wife, the husband bought the boat. Same type of situation, husband owns the house, his 18-year-old son bought a jet ski.
So I guess I'm defaulting to Joe. What's the common reading of owner?
Yeah,
Better question.
What's that?
I get even a better question. We put our house in a limited partnership,
I was going to bring that up next.
even a better one, because
Or-
now that's
or-
not a person,
Or,
that's a.
or family trust.
See,
What are the, I don't know personal watercraft, but what are the registration requirements? Are they similar to a car, that it's got to be tied to a specific address?
I think you have a mailing address,
So there
but
has
I,
to be a physical address?
but I don't know if it has to be a human being or can
Could
it
be a
be the
P.O.
name of
box.
So I
a
could
legal
register a
entity.
watercraft to an LLC, right?
or a
I think
P.O.
so.
box.
So could we, instead of saying owner of the property, could we say resident of the property? Because people are living at that property, they
Well,
might not
again-
own it, but they could still,
But again, you go back to the old
Yeah, I-
definition, it's owner or lessee or the immediate family or bona fide guests. And owner needs to be broadly construed, so it covers trusts and.
but if you rent out, going back to, if you rent out someone's house, right? So you're not the owner of the property, but if you rent out someone's house, you should be able to have your watercraft there.
Well, that's the lessee.
Right, so then maybe that should,
But again, you want to remember, we talked about the fact that a savvy person can use that word lessee to work around this stuff, so you want to be careful how you define lessee.
Yeah.
resident of the property, person living on the property?
Yeah,
I think it all goes back to this owner-occupant wording in number 1. That has to be refined.
Wait till you see the next one.
No, don't you, I thought Pat had said that we would change it to the owner, lessee, family member.
Yeah, but you
then
need
we
to work on this word
continued-
lessee.
Right.
Yeah, oh, lessee, you're right.
Yeah.
Yep,
And then-
lessee is a bit tricky,
And then just think about family trusts and stuff like that.
which probably is an infinite list. There's always somebody thinking of a new way to shelter their
I mean,
taxes.
maybe you could say directly or indirectly owned, something like that.
That's why the common usage might be the easiest way.
Okay. Aye?
Docks and piers as a principal use. Vacant properties which are used solely for the construction of waterfront structure shall be allowed no more than one waterfront structure, which shall not be longer than 25 feet, and shall not be used by more than 2 watercraft. So again, this is the vacant 6N example, right?
Yep.
It's that same 2 watercraft limit.
This is
Yep.
interesting part.
Any structure which provides access to more than 2 watercraft shall be deemed a marina and regulated in accordance with the standards for that use.
Well, that would be many people on the lake.
So notice it's provides access as opposed to mooring or docking.
Yeah, again, that's in artful drafting probably, Bob, but
Yeah.
Do we need that last sentence that Mike just mentioned, any structure provides access to more than 2 watercraft shall be deemed a marina. Do we need that in there?
And if it's here, why is it only here and not?
Yeah, I mean, I would cross that whole last sentence out.
Does this code have anything on marinas?
But no,
It does? Yeah, I didn't get to that then.
Are we okay with I then, if we take out the last sentence?
I think so,
well, we'd still have the issue
bigger
we talked
issue.
about, the
Right.
2
Yeah,
watercraft
right.
number, but
so I think that it's
all
the
through
same
here.
solution for both. I think.
Yeah, same as previous solution, right?
Okay, and J is the issue we started with, which was the pre-existing waterfront structures.
So, several things. Firstly, for HOAs, and full disclosure, I'm a member of an HOA, as is Craig, but we heard it's not just our HOA, it's other HOAs on the lake. I think the HOAs, an existing HOA, and this would be something in existence by January 1, 2022, I think ought to be excused from compliance in 1, 2, and 3. Just giving my own HOA as an example.
There was someone that spoke up, I'm sorry, Bob, at the last town meeting
80.
about the HOA.
Yeah, it's not just Mayapack Point, there are others.
Well, there's several
Colonial,
others.
I think.
There's
it
many
was.
others. There's
Yeah.
more than we know. Out by Colonial Terrace is one. A lot of those folks have come out. Mayapack Woods, Mayapack Hills, Colonial Terrace.
So these HOAs have been in existence
Senior.
for quite a long time. They're not aggressive users of dock space. Their residents indirectly pay the Lake Park District taxes by virtue of their membership in the HOA. I don't think we want to undo what they've already created. And so I think they need to be fully grandfathered without having to comply with any of this stuff, if, at all. So you would, you would be adding a number 4 that's basically says,
Except an HOA.
which shall not have to comply with 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And then number 2, for other non-HOAs, is still the same issue we've been
Yeah,
discussing.
to watercraft, yeah.
And again, notice it talks about access as opposed to dockage.
One of the things, several HOAs have spoken up. Colonial Terrace was very vocal, and Mayapack Woods and Hills. And they said the number of boat docks for their population is, small percentage. I can tell you, in Mayapack Point, there's 98 homes, there's 8 slips. That's, not many.
Yeah, no issue.
So in the same issue for number 3 in that subsection,
So-
number 3 also has the
We
watercraft
started with
limit.
this, so my question with respect to docks and piers and slips, do we want to give them more of a break because it's likely that they're going to be damaged by ice more frequently? So
I think
this
so.
is basically saying, permitted to continue provided they meet these provisions. What if my dock is 60 feet? Should it be regardless? Whatever my dock is, damaged by ice or some act of God, must I deal with the 25 feet, the 50 feet, the 2 watercraft? Any of these provisions? Or do you get a pass?
Personally, I think if it's
So it's
done
again-
within the existing or pre-existing footprint, it ought to get a pass.
Can we ask everybody to give us, we'll give them a 6-month grace period to give us a map of what they have there now? And they give it to us, and then we have it on file?
I'd love that.
This way we get it on record, what was there at this point, and then we have a baseline to go off of.
Most,
When handling the prosecution of some of these things, typically you're comparing
Yeah.
overhead photos that are from the 60s, 70s, 80s to date, and using that as your bar for determining what was there and what is there.
So Mike, just practically, that would be awesome. I think as soon as you impose that requirement, they'll squeal like stuck pigs.
No, the reason I'm saying is, this
You're gonna
says,
make me go get a survey, or how do I do that?
Doesn't
Like,
Google Earth do that for you today?
I'm sure.
no, but it says, any structure in existence on or before January 1st, 2022. So that doesn't say legally in existence, it
Right.
says in existence.
Right.
So if we give them a 6-month time to give us a map, it could be hand-drawn, it could be whatever, it could be shown to us on a Google Earth image, and then they can give us the measurements, we could go out and verify the measurements, whatever it is. But at least we have something as a baseline. The ice comes in and rips that dock out, they don't come back and say, oh no, we had a 150-foot dock here.
Yeah, I
You
just
know,
think
we
it's
have
gonna
a
be hard
baseline.
for people to do that. I think if, like, who, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah,
It's some
yeah.
sneaky thing, you're gonna try to restrict my rights, when, in fact, it's the opposite that you're trying to do, preserve their rights, but some people will not do that.
Maybe, what if you wrote in something that a homeowner could do on his own without handing it in, so that he maintains his own record, that when the
So that's
time
interesting,
comes,
Bob.
he produces it to you?
There, it might be interesting to have a provision that says, hey, waterfront property owner, it would be good if we knew what you had on your property in case there's a condition like this. We're not requiring you to do it, but it's a good idea to do it. I don't think that's gonna compel many people to do it, frankly.
But what if I just have take my own pictures and write,
You should absolutely do
and
that.
just have that, and that would be
Smartest thing in the world.
evidentiary thing that I could produce,
It's obviously the smartest thing in the world. I think Mike's point is, it's put in the code that they have to do it. I think people just will react to that. So absent as do it because it's a good thing to do.
No,
people
but
still
there's a
won't do it.
distinction between you can file something with the town, permissive, versus you can create your own record, which
Right.
you can maintain and produce that if and when the time comes that it's needed.
So that's just a good thing to do. And the next one
Exactly.
should be, and you should pay your taxes on time, and the next one should be.
Why couldn't we recommend to the town board to hire a summer student to Google Earth the lake and put it
That's-
on file?
That's what you do.
So,
An intern with a
again-
drone or a Google Earth. That's-
Comprehensive plan. You expected some of that work could have been done, you
So,
know, so,
but
so
I
yeah, that's
think-
work we should do.
You know,
Work we should do.
I think this town hires summer students anyway, so we can make that recommendation
Go
for
to
a couple
Google
thousand. You're doing a good thing for the community, you're hiring a summer student.
It's a great
You
idea.
get the drone and and then you have a nice file. So Mike gets the information that would help him. It helps the residents
Helps the
also.
residents, yeah.
Because that resident that said at the last meeting, my dock's 67 feet out, and here it is. So,
I think it's
that-
great.
that- that should go into our
I think the record, that's
recommendation.
another, so we don't have to always pick on the code. This can be a separate recommendation. The
Yeah.
town should do this.
Would
I
be
like
nice
that.
files for the lake.
Drone would be the way to do it.
Drone, yeah.
Yeah, photographs, I'm telling you.
All right, one last one.
Waivers?
Then we gotta go on to this whole economic development floating zone tonight.
Hey, hey.
You can have a mutiny.
I'm
Waivers.
surprised we got this far.
The planning board in its discretion may waive the above requirements, provided it provides the, or no less protective. So for all the stuff that was just, we talked about, you can waive it.
So again, it says no less protective of the purposes set forth herein. We need clarification on what the purpose is.
Yep.
That is very true.
Let's not make it subjective, let's make it factual.
Yep. Mike just pointed out, we just did 3 pages. I'm done, guys.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
oh, no.
Aye.
No. Before we, make a, before we make a motion to adjourn, I'd like to thank Kim for years of service. Kim,
this your last one?
is stepping down. She's done a terrific job, especially focused on the architectural review. Thank you for that, and she's taken time off for a good reason. She could be spending time with her family and sports and her 2 children. So thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Yay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second, all in favor?